Well, thanks for joining today. And I want to first introduce you to two of our co-hosts. We have Cynthia Braney, PTElephant, and she is a digital artist, author, and animator. And she has had gender dysphoria since she was growing up, but she chose alternative pathways instead of transition for therapy. And we also have Exo Turner, and she has been in this Twitter space for a while, just on Twitter, talking about sex development and DSDs. And she has Turner syndrome, which we'll get into later on. So first, what I want to do is define our terms. In this space, we're going to be discussing not just the sex binary, not just typical males and females, but also the consequences of the sex binary, the effects, the genetic effects, the hormonal effects, and how these systems produce the sex binary, and also how these systems can go wrong and produce genetic errors, hormonal errors, and how these genetic and hormonal errors then impact the people who experience them. And there's a lot of misinformation that goes around that we've seen on Twitter and just in the culture everywhere about how male and female are socially constructed, how DSDs prove that male and female exist on a spectrum, and that this is evidence that for some reason people who identify as the opposite sex can be validated as the sex that they identify as, and that people with DSDs are evidence of that for some reason. So we're gonna separate all these different concepts out and explain these things very clearly, and then have a discussion section halfway through where we can open it up to questions and comments. And so we'll just go from there. So first, let's define our terms. First, what is sex? What is its purpose, and why is it binary? So sex is simply really fundamentally about sexual reproduction. How do we create new individuals? How do we create genetic diversity? And that has existed for at least 2 billion years. Around 1.2 billion years ago, sexual reproduction started to generate male and female forms through gametes, or sex cells of differing size. One sex cell provided most of the resources, or all the resources, for the developing zygote. They were large, few in number, and that's the eggs. The other gamete provided no resources for the developing zygote, but it was fast and numerous in number, and combining those two gametes created genetic diversity across a wide range of species over the history of life. We have species of all types and form, tons of different anatomies, tons of different physiologies and behaviors, but ultimately what it comes down to is there are only two sexes across all these different species, because there are only two different body plans and gametes produced from those body plans. There's not a third sex, because a third sex would require the creation of a third gamete type and a third body plan that produces a third gamete type. So that is the purpose of sex, is to generate new individuals, create genetic diversity, and that requires just two sexes. From that, there's a difference between what sexes are, which is these phenotypes or body plans that produce two differently sized gametes. There's that, and there's also how sexes develop in individuals. How are male and female produced in individuals? And this can vary widely across species. In humans, which we'll cover specifically today, there's a specific set of genetic and hormonal mechanisms that produce a male and female. And when we think about sex development, we can divide it into two separate categories. How sex is determined, and then how sex is differentiated. Determining sex doesn't mean how we observe sex or how we identify sex in an individual. Instead, determining sex is specifically about how the genes trigger development into a male or female. It's about the developmental decision that those genes institute on the fetus. Sex determination is, in humans, initiated by a set of genes. In other species, it might be initiated by temperature. For example, crocodiles use different temperature values so that a certain set of values triggers male development and a certain set of values triggers female development. In humans and other mammals, it's really just determined by the genes that you have and the genes within the chromosomes that you have. In typical sex determination, the presence of the SRY gene on the Y chromosome triggers gonadal differentiation into testes, and then you develop into a male. If you do not have that SRY gene on that Y chromosome, then you develop as a female. Your gonads differentiate into ovaries. And this determination process is what's called mutually antagonistic. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if the SRY gene is present, it will suppress the factors that control female development. And if the SRY gene is absent, it will not suppress those female genes, and females will develop. And there's many genes involved in female development that if they aren't there, then it will allow males to develop. And so there's this back and forth push and pull process between one network of genes, the male making genes, and then the female making genes. So as this process is happening, the gonads differentiate into testes or differentiate into ovaries. There's hormones that are produced that then help build the gamete transportation systems that we call the genitalia, the internal and external genitalia, that allow the gametes to then meet up and fuse. And so we have the gonads, which are the gamete factories, and then the genitalia, which are the gamete transportation systems. And these two systems, the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system, are completely mutually antagonistic. You cannot develop a complete female system in a male, and you cannot develop a complete male system in a female. Now, biologists have theorized about why this is the case, but they think that it's likely due to the fact that to create an equal number of individual males and individual females in a species, it's important that the genetic systems antagonize each other. Otherwise, you'd create an infertile male-female mix that would not be able to actually reproduce correctly. And so that's the theoretical and observational empirical basis for why sex is binary, that there's just two different reproductive systems, each one specialized for the production of a specific gamete type, which then fuse with the other gamete type to create a new individual. So from there, what are DSDs? What are these disorders of sex development that create atypical conditions from the typical path? We define DSDs as any reproductive condition that results in atypical chromosomal, gonadal, or genital products, basically, or results. And these are traditionally divided into three categories. We have chromosomal DSDs. This is where you might have atypical chromosome combinations. You might have, instead of the typical XX for females or the typical XY for males, you might get an extra X chromosome in a male fetus, and so the fetus develops with XXY. Or you might have a female fetus who develops with just a single X chromosome and not a second X chromosome. And so this is chromosomal DSDs. And these DSDs still result in anatomies that are either male or female. Another division is 46XX DSDs. These are reproductive conditions that result in still XX chromosomes, but atypical development of gonads or atypical development of genitalia. Not all XX DSDs are female. Some, for example, XX males, are male because they develop a penis and testes, whereas other XX conditions are clear in typical females, for example, a condition MRKH, which results in a female with an absent uterus or underdevelopment of the vaginal canal and cervix. And then finally, we move on to the 46XY DSDs. And these are any DSDs that result in atypical development of gonads and genitalia in XY individuals. And like the XX cases, some can be females and some can be males, and that depends on the reproductive anatomy that they develop and how that relates to gamete type. Now, there's a good case to be made that those three categories I just listed, chromosomal, 46XX, and 46XY, should be challenged, that these categories create confusion when it comes to reproductive conditions. And this is something that we'll delve into soon. So, one important distinction to be made before we get into our discussion is that disorders of sex development, there are 40 plus different conditions. Each one is unique, each one is discrete, and they cannot be placed on a spectrum together. They are quantitatively and qualitatively different. They have different causes and different effects. Now, a subset of DSDs are clinically defined as intersex. And intersex means specifically that there's a mismatch between chromosomes, like XY or XX, and your expected phenotype. So you might, for example, get a male with XX chromosomes or a female with XY chromosomes. That is specifically an example of an intersex condition. This means that while intersex is more specific than DSDs, DSDs is broader. So intersex is a subset of DSDs, but not all DSDs are intersex conditions. Again, another point that we'll delve into soon. Lastly, these DSDs are not identities. They're not to be confused with somebody just identifying or thinking that they are something. This involves actual, real medical conditions that greatly impact the people's lives and cause life-threatening complications most of the time, often cause infertility, and a host of other physiological issues. So now that we have the basics laid out, and I can clarify any of this information if we need, I want to move forward now into our discussion with Exo Turner and kind of delve into the details on this stuff. So Exo, I wanted you to just basically provide us basically who you are, tell us who you are, tell us your personal history, and tell us about the condition you have.
Hey, Zach. Thank you for a bit of the science lesson. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone here is doing well. Speaking of consequences of the sex binary, congratulations, Zach and Cynthia, on the pregnancy. I just wanted to congratulate you guys.
Thanks.
My platform online started because I was seeing a lot of misinformation about a condition that I was diagnosed with at 17. So I will tell you a bit about that backstory. So ever since I was 8 years old, you really started to see how I was somewhat different from my peers. I was having academic and social difficulties. I was always, shorter than shorter than the other girls, and not quite as developed. But some people are late bloomers, and so it wasn't really brought to the forefront until I was 17 years old, and I had still not gotten my first period. So that was the big warning sign that either hormonally or something with my endocrine system was happening. And so that is when I got the referral to go see an endocrinologist. When I was there, the first thing that happened was I was weighed and they measured my height. For reference, I am 5'1" and my mom is 5'3". So that was not a marker for something that was abnormal. Um, and then, the doctor examined me physically. So they checked my breast development, which was very uncomfortable. You know, I was 17, and it was a very vulnerable position to be in. And they also checked the genitalia, right? Examined that again. You know, asked me questions about if I was sexually active. You know, these are things that you do come to expect if you go to a doctor, but it kind of threw me off guard because I was, you know, quite young. And then, you know, once all the basic information was taken down, I then met with the endocrinologist, and I can tell from her face, I remember it clearly, that the second I walked into her office, she recognized it. Um, so she checked my thyroid as well. And she, you know, she noticed some small phenotypical markers of the condition that I have. Um, and she told me, because she wasn't able to confirm the diagnosis until I got a karyotype test, that, and these words will ring with me forever. She said, so either what's going on with you is hormonal, and there are treatments that we can provide you with, or this is something that's genetic. And when she was telling me that, she had already known, but had not confirmed that I had Turner syndrome. And we'll go into we'll go back to those words because I do think they're important. And then, and so the official diagnosis came after. So I was sent to get a blood test, which was also very uncomfortable because I was expecting the needle to go in and out and be done with it. And the needle was in my arm taking blood for 2-3 minutes because they had to take 6 vials of my blood. And then about a week later, I was called back, and she gave me a book, and she said, "You have Turner syndrome, and we are going to have to send you to get an ultrasound because there could be a problem with your kidneys, there could be a problem with your uterus. You know, we need to make sure that everything is okay." And that was also again, these moments I remember quite vividly. I was with my mom, and she gave me these 2 huge bottles. We went and we bought them, and I had to drink both like a gallon bottle of waters, and I really had to pee. And then I was sent to do the ultrasound, and you know the doctors there pushing on my bladder, and I'm like, oh my god, don't pee on the doctor. But you know um, and so that was the first thing that happened because the kidneys are were something that the doctor was worried about, and so I had to get that checked out. And you know, she was very happy with how my uterus looked. She's like, you know, later for HRT, if you want to get pregnant, that's going to be pretty good. And I'll clarify because I'm giving you guys a lot of information. So the reason they needed my blood test was to test my karyotype, which is the amount of chromosomes that you have. So most humans have 46 chromosomes, and then you have cases with monosomy, meaning missing a chromosome, or trisomy, in where you have added chromosomes. And this particular condition affects the allosomes, meaning the sex chromosomes. So I am missing an X chromosome. Specifically, what that can mean is it can lead to learning difficulties. It leads to quite often premature ovarian failure, which means infertility. there are some phenotypical markers, for example, a wider chest, short stature, um, a wider neck, a webbed neck, they call it. So, yeah, sorry. And basically, um, this started my journey into understanding some of the things that Zach was talking about, because when you're missing a chromosome, you get very invested in where they come from and what they do, right? And a lot of people don't have like those questions in mind when they talk about karyotypes, when they talk about chromosomes. They're just like, you know, very they're they're very broad with their descriptions. Sorry, I'm getting a bit off.
Hey, so it's also, as you were talking, I was thinking of, there's this really, I don't know, weird thing that people do where they think that these chromosomal conditions that involve the sex chromosomes are somehow to be treated completely differently on like a conceptual level than disorders that involve non-sex chromosomes. So, for example, you can think of Down syndrome, which involves, I believe, a third copy of the chromosome 21, and that has nothing to do with sex chromosomes. It's just a normal, another chromosome. But that is a developmental disorder in a similar way that Turner syndrome is also a developmental disorder. And I think people have this misconception that the sex chromosomes, that all the genes on the sex chromosomes, that they are the only ones that control sex development. But in reality, there's plenty of genes that are on non-sex chromosomes that control sex development. For example, the development of the ovaries is often controlled by WNT4, which is not on the X chromosome. So it's interesting that people, for some reason, think that chromosomal disorders that involve the sex chromosomes prove that sex is a spectrum, but there's plenty of genes that still develop the person's sex as a male or female that don't have anything to do with the sex chromosomes. So in your case, you developed as a female because of certain genes on your chromosomes, and even though you were missing a second X chromosome, that doesn't mean that you're somehow like less female or any of these things that activists bring up. So I just wanted to mention that.
So there's so yeah, this comes to a lot of misconceptions that I've heard on the internet about these conditions. And the reason why I'm disheartened by it, but I'm also kind of it's also somewhat laughable, because it is very easy to distinguish um, somebody who's just heard of these conditions yesterday in like a Bio 101 class and know that these conditions exist, versus somebody who actually has read up on these conditions and the experience of people with these conditions. And this is why it's called consequences of the sex binary, because you can't I couldn't have gone through premature ovarian failure without being female. That's a specifically female experience, right? Though atypical, right? Um, and that's the whole thing. When I first found out about my condition, I went through that question also. I was like, am I technically female and also technically not? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the first questions that came to mind. And then, I thought back on all the times I've heard those words and those terms. And I am a very big Discovery Channel nerd and big animal lover, and grew up basically watching these documentaries on animal behavior, and connected connected the dots that if male and female are terms that encompass different species, then there's perhaps something a little more than just a karyotype that goes into what male and female are, and then in the classical definition of biology, it is basically gonads, right? That help distinguish what the sexes are, because those are the primary organs that are linked to gametes. But there's a lot to discuss on that end. But yeah, I mean, there's so many arguments, and it gets really frustrating because all of that, gets lost. Like we get lost in these discussions when really it should be about, how do we help a vulnerable 17-year-old who has a DSD go through her diagnosis and get her peer support. How do we help a young man, who's getting diagnosed with Klinefelters? How do we help deal with, the loss that is infertility? How do we, help support people with DSDs? And we can't have any discussion about that if you can't have a discussion about male and female. And this activism is basically trying to poke a hole in those terms, but those terms are why I exist in the first place. Sexual development is important to understand, especially for, those of us with DSDs.
Right, because people with DSDs are products of that sex binary. If male and female did not exist, then people with DSDs would not exist. And like those, it's so important to understand that the existence of male and female, that understanding what those terms mean, then allows us to accurately treat people who have DSDs. It helps us treat their infertility if they have infertility. It helps us treat any reproductive issue they have because we can look at them and know their sex development and know that they developed as a male or female and know what that entails and know what systems are involved in that and what's a healthy hormone level for a male and what's a healthy hormone range for a female.
That a female typically gets her menstruations between the ages of 9 to 16 is important to know.
Yes,
all
exactly.
of those things. And finally, there's also the inverse of that, which is true, which is males and females with DSDs actually highlight how robust the sex binary is. We highlight all the different genes that encompass and help male development and female development come to fruition, right? And so it is, we are part of the binary it made us to. And we're a predictable consequence of it because, like you said, in a mutually antagonistic developmental system, having an organism that has a feature of the opposite sex is like a predictable consequence when you look at developmental pathways. Having missing or added chromosomes is something that is easy to predict. When you have a system of two, basically, and a system of two is abinary. So I'll finish there.
I just shared a paper in the Twitter space that you guys can look at. It says Developmental Biology paper exploring mammalian sex determination with a focus on the genes involved in DSD cases. And what this paper does is it looks at insights from humans and mice, and it looks at the molecular and genetic causes of various DSDs, whether it's sex reversal with an XX fetus developing as a male or potentially a XY fetus developing as a female. And they just list out so many genes involved in sex development. And we only know what these genes do because of DSD cases, because of understanding what happens when you knock out one gene and a different outcome results. And so this huge list of genes, and not all of them are on the sex chromosomes. This huge list of genes, these are all involved in sex development. And the more we find out about these genes and how they work, the better we will be able to treat people with DSDs.
I do want to add two things because I wrote down in my notes as you were speaking. The term intersex. Let's discuss it.
Yes, that's an important one. We see that all the time from gender activists, and they often use it as a way to create confusion by saying, look at these people who are supposedly between male and female, because it sounds like they're saying between with the word intersex. So it's important that we understand what the history of that term is, and how it's used, and how it should be used, or if at all. So yeah, you can go ahead, XO.
Yeah. So I will call intersex. I will link it to a term that, called Siamese Twins, right? So Siamese twins is an old term from a time where people who had developmental complications were exploited. I mean, we still are, but that's a different conversation. And put in freak shows, right? Because they weren't hireable. And so Siamese twins is a term for what's actually called conjoined twins. And what's happening when you say sex is a spectrum is you're pointing at people that have developmental complications. And you're saying that they are like Siamese twins. And sorry, I will explain the metaphor better. So if you were to say there are humans with two heads, right? And you would point at a Siamese twin and go, see, here's a human with two heads. But in reality, it is two humans, each with one individual head. And they are not Siamese twins, they are conjoined twins. And it is, and that's how I would like to move the quote unquote term intersex. Because as discussed earlier, that term is a vague term that is that denotes a small group of people with different developmental complications, and where there's a discordance between either karyotype and phenotype, or there is a developmental complication in where there is ambiguous genitalia. So those are very small group of people, and each specific person that may have one of these conditions, when they go to a physician, when they read up on scientific literature, they shouldn't be looking up the term intersex. They should be looking up specific language related to their condition. And most people who use the term intersex do not use it that way. They use it as a political term. And they group in DSDs, most of which are not ambiguously male or female. And excuse me. So I don't think we should be using that term anymore. I just think that, you can say that there is a small group of people with DSDs that have a discordance with their sexual characteristics. They are still male or female. And that is true. And that their political needs, their, social psycho needs have nothing to do with people who are trans or have a gender identity, because it is not the same experience at all. At the end of the day, right, we are a gonochoric species. There are two sexes, and humans can't change their sex. And that has personal, political, biological consequences that we have to deal with and live with. And we should not be putting things into law and policies that disregard this, because it is detrimental to, I think, um, society, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, that is my 2 cents, at least.
I just want to add, we had a friend of ours write an article on the Paradox Institute about uterus transplants in males. And it's so insane to me that there are people like you and other people with other DSDs, and there are so many like life-threatening issues and so many like challenges when it comes to fertility and things like that. And instead of putting the focus there on people who need the help, we're looking into trying to do these things straight out of Frankenstein. It's kind of like crazy to me that they want to use live donors and everything else to try and put these organs that really can't function in the opposite sex body. Like it's crazy. The implications of that are insane when we've got so many people who are female or male that need these like actual like medical procedures and research and everything into their conditions to improve quality of life and to even save lives. And we're just not doing that. And there's a stigma that I know from being friends with you and other people with DSDs that, oh, we can't medicalize these conditions. These conditions do need medicine in so many cases, and it is criminally negligent to like remove those things from insurance coverage, from like research and everything else that I've heard about. I know Days Gone By has talked about it with me, how her insurance has removed coverage for her condition and things like that because activists basically made it so it was demedicalized. And I don't know. It's really heartbreaking to see this happening. And it's all because of something completely unrelated. Like trans people have nothing to do with people who have DSDs. Like there might be some people who are trans that have a DSD, but as far as like the medical realm, like they are not related in that way.
Yeah, there's that backwards focus that's created where people who do not have any disorder of sex development, they have typical reproductive development, that the healthcare focus and the research focus is on them, even for things like uterine transplants. And yet the focus on people with DSDs who actually do have serious medical conditions, they're just left out to dry, basically. And it's so awful that there's that focus on insurance, that insurance is more focused on the trans needs than the needs of those with DSDs. And it's just like flipping the script, basically. We're like, we're going to help treat this condition that exists in your mind, but not treat a physical condition that actually exists in your reproductive system that needs to be directly treated. And
it's worse than that. It's hypocritical because our conditions are invoked, and it doesn't. That's also the thing is they will invoke all conditions, and will pick the one that best suits their argument at any given time and mix up the experiences of, for example, like James with his condition and Katie with hers, and mine. They will, go to mine because of the karyotype, and then they'll jump to Katie's because of the missing uterus, and then we'll go to James for, so they don't really care. And what's worse is that orgs that are supposed to represent our needs are getting caught up and eaten by this. And it's beyond hypocritical because there's a saying, right, in prominent quote unquote intersex activist groups, delay is okay. And I'm like, so, you understand that there's consequences of surgery and playing with hormone levels and puberty blockers because we've dealt with that, right? I've had to take birth control since 17, and that comes with its consequences, right? And so, you know, and yet you are willing to push for 13-year-olds to get, mastectomies or be put on puberty blockers or, undergo this huge, adult decision. And you're not even giving them all the information, because I'm here thinking, my God, I have all these, things that I've had to deal with my whole life because of my condition. And I see someone who is going to basically opt into that and mess with their perfectly healthy sexual development. And all I want to do is scream, you don't know what you're taking for granted, and you don't know what you're messing with. And so I'm like, I don't think that these people that are, hypocritically saying delay is okay and then saying, yeah, like protect trans youth and allow all of this to happen, uh, you know, uh, pick one. Either, we can be performing these surgeries and be messing with sexual development, or we leave it alone, you know? But you can't, like, you can't be advocating for both simultaneously. And especially, these advocates that claim to know the consequences and that cry about these, interventions, you have no right to align yourself with a group of people who are advocating for basically interventions. And that's just how I see it. And I can't see it any other way. You know, like I saw this post about, there was a mother and her child who was trans. And there was this, they were celebrating the fact that her child was going through early menopause. And I'm like, that is, insane to me as somebody who has had to, learn at 17 about something I couldn't control, and that I basically went through early menopause without, being able to have any say in it, and just see people advocating into that. It was heartbreaking. And, it goes back to what my doctor said. And, my doctor was very kind and firm with me. And she said, either this is hormonal and we can treat it, or this is genetic and there's nothing you can do. So I have to be the adult and deal with the consequences of the fact that I have this condition, the consequences of my sexual development and my chromosomes, and, what that comes with. And I would not want to lie to others because I don't think it's helpful. And there are days where the consequences of the sex binary are very painful. And, but at the end of the day, living in reality has been how I have grown up and accepted myself for who I am and what I am, and this activism that I see online and why I decided to come online and speak out goes against all of that, and is very much, I feel, a slap to the face to all the pain that I have gone through and others with DSDs have gone through. So I really wish they would stop invoking us, right? Because we are a consequence of the binary.
Yeah, this whole discussion has reminded me of the fact that there's this pattern of just muddying knowledge and muddying the details of these conditions for activist purposes and ideological purposes. And I really liked your Siamese Twins analogy, because just like that term, intersex is also used as a way to muddy things. It's not clear at all. It is based on a misrepresentation and misunderstanding of what those conditions are. Just like how the Siamese twin, oh, it's one person with two heads. No, it's two different people who are conjoined, and that term is fundamentally misunderstanding, either willfully or just being ignorant of what that condition is. Same thing with intersex. It's used so much to muddy knowledge, to say that these people are just ambiguous. We don't know what sex they are, and so therefore, people who identify as the opposite sex, you're completely validated 100% in every single way. Like, it's such a mess. And that's why it's so important that when we do talk about DSDs or do talk about intersex, that we're talking about and mention specific conditions, and we get into the details and we're asking questions. Oh, what condition are you talking about? Things like that, because that will help shine a light on what we're trying to explain and explore with these conditions, instead of just lumping them all together under one big broad brush, which doesn't provide any accurate medical treatment or help. It's not helpful at all for anything, really. So yeah, go ahead, Turner, and then after that we're going to open up for questions and comments with the audience, and I know we have a few requests there too, so yep.
Yeah. And again, because I've been taking notes about what you've been saying, it's funny, you mentioned that sex development genes, right, are not solely attached to X and Y. And I say this often, but sexual development is basically the process, right, of going from childhood to adulthood, right, of maturation. And when you mess with that process, you're messing with systems that are tied to your cardiovascular system, your musculoskeletal system, your digestive system. And so it is all tied together, right? So one of the consequences that I have to deal with is I have to go get my heart checked every year because I can have some serious heart complications that could kill me. There's a slight, there's a slight wide widening of. Anyway, not. I'll send links and stuff elsewhere, but it has to be monitored if it gets any bigger, right? And that's something that I stress about every year because I have to go to the cardiologist and I'm like, is it going to get worse? And I have to be exceedingly careful with, my eating and exercise routine because I have to take care of that. I've had to grieve the loss of fertility. And like I was mentioning in the beginning, the reason why I had to do that sonogram was because women with Turner syndrome can go through renal failure, right? There's this condition called horseshoe kidney in which your kidneys are developed together and they don't separate. And that's common. It can happen to women with Turner syndrome. And so, these are the things I'd rather be discussing and that I'd rather come up when you're talking about Turner syndrome, right? I'd rather you talk about academic support for those of us who have learning disabilities. I'd rather you talk about, body acceptance, right? And peer support groups, and not this whole conversation about, proving or disproving something that is evident and will always be evident, that is before humans and after humans, which is the fact that sex is binary. I wish our conditions would be spoken about outside of that, and be about us and not about validating someone's self-perception that they want to, manifest through, unethical means, personally, I think. So, those are my 2 cents. There are a few people here in the audience that also have DSDs that I will let up and they can speak about their experience. And I just want to thank everybody for coming in and listening. And I want to thank Zach and Cynthia, who have been super supportive. And, Zach has, made a lot of different resources pulled together from, different papers that have been written that say everything that we're saying, right? That exists within that reality that humans can't change sex and there are two sexes and that these developmental pathways are, shown and highlighted through these conditions. So thank you guys. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Sin.
Thanks, Sixo. Really appreciate it. So first, I want to move to Katie in Boston, and she has something to say that she's requested to speak. We talked earlier about something that when I talked about the division of DSDs into 3 different categories: chromosomal, 46XX, and 46XY. I don't know if this is why she wanted to speak, but this is one of the things that I talked about with her, that it does create a lot of confusion, those 3 categories, and she might want to elucidate that and talk about that. So you're on, Katie.
Thank you so much, Zach, and thank you so much to my friend Exo, who's such a champion for all of us. I agree with everything you said, and thank you so much for just saying it so eloquently. I just had a couple of things I wanted to say, and of course I'm happy to answer any questions, but the first is in response to what Zach had just said. One of the things that has become evident to me lately is the architecture of how DSDs are sort of grouped is confusing. So, for example, there are other DSDs that affect the Müllerian development of females. And I think, for example, my condition is better grouped with those other Müllerian conditions where, Turner's and Klinefelter's are chromosomal conditions, and probably there are other ways to group DSDs so that people better understand what we're talking about. So that's sort of that point. But just back to what you guys were saying about the uterine transplants, it's really something that is so upsetting for me because, I personally was born with a, underdeveloped uterus. Not all women with MRKH are born without a uterus. In fact, most have some uterine development, but I don't have a uterus that works for childbirth at all. And so I have to have a transplant if I want to have a baby that way. And, years and years have gone by where, someone my age is not going to get a uterine transplant now, but younger girls with my condition can get one and are getting them. And I just feel like I don't understand how we've been bypassed. And now the whole conversation is about giving uterine transplants to males who can't even probably use them ever. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is just back to the point on medical coverage. I don't begrudge anyone anything. I don't hate trans people. I just don't understand why insurance will cover sex reassignment surgery for trans people. But then if I want to have a surrogate or if I want to freeze my eggs, there's no coverage for me. But I was born unable to do that, to do those things without, fertility assistance. And so I don't understand how we've just been lost in the shuffle here and no one seems to care or notice. And so I just feel that intersex and trans have taken over reproductive development conditions and sucked up all the oxygen. And it's just not a conversation that really has anything to do with actual DSD conditions. So thank you, Zach, for the floor. I really appreciate that.
That is also true. Insurance will cover, depending on where you're at. They're pushing for coverage for transition, and yet those of us with DSDs, are not covered for things like freezing our eggs or hormones that we may need to actually survive. And also, I also want to second, we do not hate trans people and never will. Because if I hated trans people, I would be telling you, yeah, go mess with your sexual development. Go transition. That's a smart idea. If I hated you, that's what I would be telling you. just so we're clear, right? I just wanted to clarify that. And thank you, Katie, for bringing up the issue that we are missing coverage and support for our medical needs. Again, very important.
Nick can go next.
Hey, that XXY man, you can go next. I know you wanted to. Well, I know that you have discussed before the fact that you have been treated at doctors in a way that is not helpful, where they were basically telling you that you did not need medical treatment or hormones or things like that, where your condition does require you to take hormones. If you want to talk about that, you can. I just wanted to get that out there. I know that's something that you mentioned before.
Hi, thanks for setting this space up. It's been really great and totally agree with everything so far. I just want to put out there that this is just coming from a personal perspective. I'm in a total personal capacity at the moment. I stopped activism last month due to severe health complaints. So I'm only on here really just to, every now and again. But yeah, I started having a lot of health issues when I was younger, from severe learning difficulties, all the way through to developing gynecomastia in my early teens, and a lot of other issues, like obviously not developing like other peers of mine and other boys in school, where a lot of them were growing facial hair. I did none of that and was quite effeminate, I guess, in a way. Not to say that I was female at all, but I got a lot of stick for it, a lot of bullying. It's a painful period of my life that I really don't dwell on, put it that way, especially the bullying in for physical education lessons, being taunted the way my body looked when I took off my shirts, to the point where I didn't go. I hate sports now because of that. But yeah, when I got told by my mum, eventually, you need to go and see a doctor about this. This is obviously something's not right here. And I remember I think I was 17, about maybe 16, 17 when I went in, and the doctor had a look at me, and he was looking at, like, really, he said, take your shirt off, let me look. Oh yeah, they're just moobs. And also the way that you haven't grown hair. It's just a developmental issue that will probably sort itself out. So I was like, all right, okay, because as a teenager hearing that, you trust your doctors. Usually you trust that they know what they're talking about. But even back then, and this was what, over 18 years ago, so it's quite modern. If you think about it, it's quite recent. And, to be re-referred in my 30s, because I got diagnosed at the age of 32. So well over 10 years later, 15 years later, in fact, it wasn't a shock, but at the same time, I was so disappointed in the doctors that I had for not, telling me the bloody truth. And the other thing is, because of that late diagnosis, I have developed a lot of issues. Most recent issue being my heart, which I totally relate to Turner, but it's happened to me without realizing it last month. So I'm not happy at all. And it's the reason why I've cut back on a lot of my activism to be a healthier person, basically. But no, I've got an early onset of osteoporosis that I'm hoping will sort itself out with the medication I'm now on, which took ages to get. I mean, I was told that I would need TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, last year. And I was put on a massive waiting list to even get that started, which was frightening for me. But yeah, being told, that it's difficult, because from a personal perspective, activism aside, I just want, like the rest of my friends with DSD conditions, I just want us to be understood better. I essentially just want younger me's, so children and teenagers, to be treated better than what I was treated like by the medical professionals. And I'm really worried also that the ideology of gender identity and the intersex activists, trying to tell, young men with Klinefelter syndrome that they are somehow more female or less male. Like, I hear this quite often. I've intercepted it when I came back onto Twitter, being told that I'm not 100% male. And it's so demeaning and so hurtful when people say that to me. It's like, I am a man. I'm no different. My sex is no different to an XY male or any other male for that matter. And to be, attacked constantly by these gender ideologists, and there's one of the biggest hypocrisies that I see, actually, because a lot of these individuals, they moan on about being misgendered and they cry about it and say it's a massive crime and that it's causing genocide. And yet at the same time, they're telling and doing mantras like trans men are men, but then turning around and saying to men with DSD conditions, oh yeah, you're not 100% male. You're not really a man. You're a eunuch. I've been told, eunuch, or however you say it, being told that I'm that, or biologically non-binary. It's like, get a grip. It's so it's full of hypocrisy. And it basically is just lies to spread this sort of ideology of feelings, basically. And, my condition isn't feelings. It's a very real biological condition that needs very real medical treatment. And I think, likewise, a lot of my fellow friends with DSDs agree. We are born, with these congenital conditions. We've suffered enough throughout our lives, had trauma, pain. I mean, I get pain in my gonads quite often because my testes are deformed as well. I mean, I don't want that. I get it quite a lot. It's not nice. Drives me quite mad, to be absolutely honest with you. But yeah, putting other issues aside, I just wish people would just treat us as human beings with medical conditions rather than pawns in some sort of messed up, warped ideology that, is helping nobody. It really isn't. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents anyway. But I'll let someone else speak. But thanks, Zach. And it's nice to hear your voice again, Turner.
Missed you, Nick.
Yeah, that's a great point about the hypocrisy. It's not mentioned enough, I don't think. And it is so important to focus on that, they will just completely blow up about misgendering. But then when it comes to people with males and females with DSDs, they will spend no issue with just completely missexing these people and saying that a person with atypical chromosomes is for some reason not a male or female. So next I want to go to James, and then from there we'll go to DD.
Oh, thank you for having this space, Zach. It's really helpful. I'm James, and I was born with which was formerly called a pituitary condition, but now has been lumped into everything else. I was born with something called hypogonadic hypogonadism, and all DSDs, including Turners and Klinefelters, have hypogonadism. Mine is just specific to my pituitary gland not stimulating my testicles to produce androgen, or in females, it doesn't produce estrogen. So we don't go through puberty. So essentially, we're born castrated. It actually used to be called eunuch syndrome back in the day, and since we're using these terms now that were just horrible terms, but they're being resurrected. So I'm all the rage now after WPATH released that eunuch thing. Now, and I actually got somebody who was some trans person who was just totally obsessing over my condition, which was a little creepy, but that's what you get. So basically, my condition is treated with the right sex, which if you're male, you just put androgen. If you're female, you put estrogen. And then it comes with infertility and learning disabilities. And if you have the genetic condition called Kalman syndrome, you have a complete lack of smell, which is actually quite life altering. You can't smell gas stoves, or it's just quite a bad thing to have no smell. That's because the smell glands don't develop in the pituitary. Mine was unknown. They don't understand the way why I got it. They just know I somehow got it. So it's just of unknown causes. So another thing that has to be clarified: that all these surgeries, that the intersex, basically the people talk about, like dilation and hormones. Kalman and Kleinfelders, the people who discovered these conditions, also developed things like androgen to treat them. So these conditions were treated with androgen, and they were developed, and estrogen was developed to treat health conditions like this, and also dilation and all those other surgeries. They originally came from people who had maldeveloped sex organs to operate them. Now, there are instances where they're misused and bad surgeries, and that all happens, but that's not the majority. So, and the other thing I want to say is a lot of the detransitioners are complaining about symptoms related to hypogonadism. So when you hear osteoporosis, osteoporosis is caused by hypogonadism. It's caused by the lack of androgen or estrogen. And when you give cross-sex hormones to people who haven't gone through puberty, you risk doing that. Matter of fact, I heard of several kids in Sweden who have osteoporosis, males at 16 years old, which is unheard of. A male having osteoporosis at 16 years old. There's 4 levels of osteoporosis. One was so severe, his spinal cord collapsed, and now he's bedridden and in pain all the time. And osteoporosis is irreversible. It can be treated, but once you go down that osteoporosis path, you can't reverse the damage. So this is something that's going to start happening to people who go through gender affirming care, and this is the one thing that's going to be hard to. It's been very hard to avoid all these health consequences that keep popping up. And if you watch that documentary on Trans Train, you'll see that there's heart conditions that develop with estrogen in males. There's all sorts of conditions that are going to start developing over the years from these misused treatments. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Could you post a link to that documentary, James?
Okay, I'll put the link to the documentary.
Thank you so much.
EXO, you wanted to speak?
I did, because I just wanted to point out, again, for people who study biology, for people who are scientifically minded, right? There's observations that, I'm sure James and I have made because of our conditions. And one of them, like James was saying, because of Kalman's, the sense of smell is affected by male and female sexual development, right? For Turners, a common thing that happens with women in Turners is that we can go deaf, right? So how males and females perceive the world and interact with the world, is sewn into our male and female development, right? And believing this isn't, bigotry and isn't meant to push people into being a type of person. It is observation of the world so that we can make good decisions. And because it has consequences, right? It has personal, political, biological consequences. And when you're talking about the binary, you're talking about a fundamental fact of how life reproduces and how we all got here. And it is an evolutionary understanding of the world. It is not a religious or emotional one. So, I just wanted to point that out. How we perceive the world is impacted by male and female development, just as these conditions impact hearing and smell, right? So just wanted to point that out.
Thanks, EXO. Freya, you're up, and then we'll have Problem Being speak after that. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Love all of you guys. I've enjoyed the space. I agree with 99% of everything you said. And instead of arguing over the 1%, I wanted to add to the conversation instead of trying to take away from it. Another problem that we've been seeing also popping up and getting more popularity is non-binary affirming care models that have been popping up, and arguments we've been arguing against forever. Like since they started coming out and it started conflating it even more, where you have them doing what's called nullification surgeries. And I'd love to get commentary upon that. So with nullification surgeries, you have penectomies or connectomies, double mastectomies where they intentionally remove both nipples. And even as trans, it's everything trans is argued against for their surgical care, because you're just cutting off the healthy body parts. You're not seeking further feminization. You're not doing anything with it. You're throwing them in the garbage can. On top of that, they have phallus-preserving vaginoplasties to conflate the intersex argument. And I remember the one website I like to quote a lot tells you that it gives you a fully functional vagina. And my first comment and thought was, what's functional to you at that point, especially with the conflation and the misinformation from the medical community that has made this problem even worse when it comes down to the misunderstanding. As all of you know, I am trans, but I'm deeply rooted in my biological reality. And my DSD condition, unfortunately, has proved that. And everyone who's gone down the HRT path and transition has to know that it shuts down that part of your anatomy when you're going the opposite sex route. And that's why you have atrophy coming into play, from testicular atrophy to atrophy of the uterus, and having to have those parts removed, like with several male to female trans and female to male. And it's just insane that we have this disconnect from the truth on the situation that they're taking. You have Shapeshifter was told that they could completely change their sex in every sense of the word, and people that are misled by the medical community. And let's be real, when it comes down to the funding of research, there's only so much money that gets put into actual research versus leaving the system as is to make money and profit off of people and their suffering. And because it's such a small, minute proportion that are suffering from DSDs, they just don't have the money that they could be making. And then we have people pushed into this space to get these surgeries and think this is the way, and are misled by the medical professionals themselves. It just creates an even worse situation that's causing problems for all sides. And I agree with Turner and everyone else on, I would love to see the term intersex removed completely from the conversation, because of how misleading it has been proven to be and how detrimental it has been for everyone.
Thanks, Freya. So let's go to Dee Dee first, because she was had been requesting and wanting to speak for a while, and then we'll get to Problem Being after that.
Okay, hi everyone. I've always wanted to be in a space talking about, DSDs. Okay, so like I don't remember which, island this was, but it was one of the Caribbean islands, right? It was either the Dominican Republic or Haiti. But like, it had a very large community of people with DSDs. And so nobody ever knew why this was the case, but like, what people ended, one of the popular theories right now, like the most supported one by the scientists, is that there's an enzyme deficiency happening with the pregnant women in the island. And it got me thinking about how, with this idea of like, the gender politics, how they affect real life and like the consequences of the sex binary. You guys have been talking in the beginning of the space. You were talking about, things like vaginal atrophy. EXO was talking about her kidneys, death, real medical things. Even, ex male here was talking about, having deformed testicles. And it's like, you know, thinking about like, the women in those islands, and like the pregnant women and the children they give birth to, those kids that end up having DSDs and are raised, this way or that way, depending on like, how the parents feel about like their gender or whatever. I remember one story of a guy who grew up, being raised as a girl, treated like a girl, didn't identify with being a girl, but that's a story for another day. And then when it was discovered that like he was actually a boy, like he leaned into that and embraced it. But at the end of the day, he was still a boy with a micro penis. And it's like, people say celebrate that you're special, you're different, you're non-binary, and like, all in the name of gender politics, all in the name of feelings. But that would be like, telling somebody like XX male to celebrate the fact that he has, deformed testes. Why should that guy have to celebrate the fact that he has a micro penis? And in all of this bullshit of like, be this fake positivity in order to protect the feelings of like cis, hetero, men without DSD, all of them with perfectly healthy, functional bodies and genitalia, you kind of like, throwing guys like him, mothers like the women in those countries and those islands, and children like that under the bus. Because while you're all over here busy celebrating this shit like a good thing, who's going to do the job and the work it takes to research this stuff and, figure out treatments, cures, and stuff like that? Like, who, if it is an enzyme deficiency, like they're saying, or even a vitamin deficiency, what do you it's probably an easy fix. What if we just sent all those women vitamin D supplements? What if the government, gave all of them prenatal vitamins? What if they were given those enzymes? I buy enzymes, for my gut track and stuff like that. Would we see a drop in kids born with DSDs in these countries, in these islands? Maybe, I don't know, but I think that's worth figuring out. That's worth trying. But we're not even going to try because things like this need, they require the activism to make you know about it, right? They require people speaking about it, educating on it so that people can be moved. And when people are moved, that's when people get involved. That's when the doctors get involved. That's when people give their money. That's when people talk about it. And that's when something actually happens. And I see that like, activists for people with DSD activists can't even get there because they're busy fighting the battle of misinformation. When I was a kid, I grew up thinking I didn't know what a person with DSD was. I didn't know what who a person who was trans was. And then like, we used to watch this popular show in South Africa on ETV. It was called Ripley's Believe It or Not. And on one episode, they were talking about somebody who was both a man and a woman, people who were intersex. And that was the last I heard of it until, The Hangover happened. The Hangover, the movie series that was really popular, a trilogy. In the sequel, they all go to Bangkok and they meet, a whole bunch of ladyboys. And I used to think, oh, so there are women in this world, chicks with dicks, women with breasts, women who are women just like me, except they have penises. And I thought that was like a real thing because, I was a child and I was uneducated. And, I went through my SJW period when I was a teenager. So I went around talking about hermaphrodites and how we need to have empathy for them. And, some women can have dicks or whatever. And, it was all with good intentions, right? I did it as a kid because I wanted to make this world a more tolerant and easier place for, the marginalized amongst us. But I didn't know that at the time that I was spreading misinformation, you know, and like I'm thinking about, DSD activists that have been fighting for years, speaking about like their experiences, their lives, trying to educate people about the science behind like, their conditions, trying to get people moved so that they can like, take action to, provide diagnose the stuff earlier so that people like Exo Turner can get the human growth hormone earlier. Because Exo told me that like I don't Exo told me, I remember we were talking about the human growth hormone and how it's prescribed with people with DSD disorders. She can't take it anymore because like, it's she's too old according to her doctors. They're saying at this point it'll do more
I
harm than
was
good.
told at 17, actually. Um, but yeah, because the doctor said it would not be a good idea for me to take growth hormones because at that point I was pretty much done getting taller and growing. So,
But imagine But imagine if like you got it when you were younger. Imagine if they had diagnosed you when you were younger. Imagine if somebody took action when those women were pregnant in those islands and gave them the proper prenatal vitamins that they needed, whether it's enzymes or whatever. Imagine if somebody was actually researching this stuff. Imagine if people like, imagine if people were educated about the stuff in sex health class. Would children have been kinder, more empathetic to boys like XX in their schools? Would people have been kinder, more empathetic to other kids with DSDs? And it's like you can't even get there in, DSD activism because you're fighting the war against misinformation. And now the war has intensified after all that work to, eradicate the word intersex, after all the work to, let's take like, even the term assigned sex at birth, right? Assigned sex at birth has nothing to do with people like Laverne Cox who are born healthy, visible male children. It is about, the kids who are misdiagnosed and misassigned at birth with, a sex identity, a gender identity because of like, their ambiguous genitalia. And I'm not saying that like, what a tragedy it is that a little boy was raised with dresses and was given a girl's name. I'm talking about the fact that like, it gets so bad that kids very, very young are given, surgeries that that a lot of them say that they don't need, right? I'm talking about kids who very, very young, let's say little boys, right, are raised as girls, and then like they're forced to get married like girls. And I'm not saying that's bad because they're boys, but like imagine being forced to get married, number one, but on top of that, you're forced to get married to another man as a man, and like and like and then your penis comes out later because of like, I don't know, puberty or some shit like that. And now like all this extra shit is happening too, right? Or you don't get the help that you need and you're infertile, but like there was a chance that you could have been that you could have been made fertile or treated, but you don't get that treatment. People don't even know. A lot of people, even educated people, doctors, don't even know that your condition is real because of misinformation, right? So when we were talking about people, assigned sex at birth, we were talking about people like, I would say, Castor Semenya, because I think Castor Semenya is somebody who's a victim of gaslighting their entire fucking life. I feel like the government, I feel like his coach, I feel like his doctors, everyone fucking lied to him just so that they can pretend like South Africa can produce a gold medalist, right? I feel like, I remember this story, and I'm about to finish because I know I take long. I remember the story I was watching on reality tele no, it was one of those Oprah types of shows, and they were interviewing like these twins who, one of them was accidentally maimed during circumcision. And like the doctors, assholes that they were, covering their own asses, decided to, refer the kid to and their parents to a gender psychiatrist, whatever type. He was like Sigmund Freud, basically. And he thought, nurture over nature, right? If I raised, he wanted to experiment on these kids and basically raise the child as a girl and see if they would accept that identity as a girl. And one of the many things that he did was, encourage the parents to cut off the rest of his penis, right? Basically raise him as a girl, put him in dresses, and on top of that, did sexual experiments and simulated sex between the two twins. And years later, when he found out I'm a man, yada yada, and accepted it, for those few years that he lived as a man, before he committed suicide again, sorry to that person, he was happy wearing men's clothes. He got married, he adopted kids, he built a life for himself. And he built a life for himself. That is what we mean when we're talking about people who are misassigned sex at birth. The people like him who are maimed, people like Castor Semenya who are gaslit, people like the other aforementioned man or woman who I even remember this other story. Let me finish. But I remember this other story of a girl in America who was raised as a boy her entire life. And when she finally decided to have sex and she thought she was a gay man having sex, she got pregnant. And I'm not saying that pregnancy or teen pregnancy isn't shocking or traumatic for female children or children who are raised girls, right? But can you imagine thinking you're a boy your entire life and going through the work and all of that shit to accept your identity as a gay boy, you're attracted to boys and you have sex for the first time and then you get pregnant? Like that is what we're talking about when we're talking about people who are assigned sex at birth, but instead it's appropriated by people like Laverne Cox or whatever, or what's his face? I remember this person from Pose, Angelica Ross, who say, I was traumatized. I missed out on being a woman because I never developed womanly hips. You never develop womanly hips because you're a man. It's like when they talk about, women with PCOS or hormonal imbalances that end up growing like beards and facial hair. You know, when we talk about accepting women for like their bodies and like even their body hair, even facial hair, we were talking about them. You're growing a beard because you're a man. She's growing a beard because of a medical condition. You're typical, she's atypical, you know? Like you're not a woman with PCOS, you're a man, okay? And you weren't assigned male at birth. You are male. And now, terms like that are being appropriated, of course, which further goes into the war against misinformation, which further like and if all the bullshit they talk about, we're for the people of genders, we're for like people with intersex and DSDs or whatever, they do the most harm against the movements, the activism for children, for people with DSDs. Like think about I remember I need to finish, and this is my final point. I remember when there was I think there was an artificial hormone um not deficiency, shortage in the UK. They ran out of estrogen. That estrogen is for women going through menopause. That estrogen is for women surviving cancer who have had their ovaries or or their wombs removed. That estrogen is for women and maybe even men with DSD or sexual development disorders. And now those people are not going to get their medicine. Those people are having to face a shortage because their medication is being abused by people that don't even medically need it. It's like I have ADHD, and it's ADHD is heavily regulated now. We the people who have it can't get Adderall, we can't get our medication, we can't get Concentra without this doctor's note or that doctor's note. You need to go through all these checks and balances. At one point, there was a shortage. And you know why? Because Everyone and their mother was abusing our medication. Children in school abusing our medication. Athletes abusing our medication. Even drug addicts abusing our medication. Okay, I'm done.
I wanted to add that the doctor you were talking about was John Money, and the victim of his experimentation that you're referencing was David Reimer. And it wasn't only him who ended up taking his own life, but his brother later also took his own life because of the trauma from the sexual abuse that they both suffered. And yeah, these experimentations, it's never a good thing and should be avoided as much as possible on kids.
So I want to go to XY Man, and then Katie, and then Turner. And then after that, we're going to open up for questions with the audience, just general questions or specific questions, and we'll wrap up from there.
Thank you, Zach. I just wanted to talk more about the intersex term. When I was an activist, I did talk about the term and its connotations and its historical connotations. And one of the things with it was coined over 100 years ago. It is very outdated. It is a misnomer. So it tries to make out that we're between sexes, which is not true, obviously. In 2002, conditions such as myself, the Klinefelter I have, weren't even listed as intersex. In 2002, the Intersex Society of North America, ISNA, went to vote on including Klinefelter syndrome as an intersex condition on the basis of one individual that wanted to identify as intersex. Now, I spoke to my friends across the globe who have Klinefelter, and in particular Graham in New Zealand, who is an outspoken Klinefelter activist, or XXY activist, and he disputed this back in 2002, and quite a few men with Klinefelter disputed ISNA and said, no, it's not an intersex condition, it is a reproductive disorder. And they were shut down. And this is how dubious gender identity, the whole ideology behind it, the intersex organizations across the globe, and this is how manipulative liars they are, because they went ahead and they included Klinefelter. They ignored the vast majority of men with Klinefelter who said no over just one man's opinion who identified differently. So obviously for years now, Graham and many other activists for Klinefelter have been battling this and saying, look, it's not intersex. Our conditions are not, we don't have ambiguous genitalia. That's just not true at all. We are males. Klinefelter only affects males. And it just goes to show how bad it is. Now, the term intersex back in the 90s, 80s and 90s was actually quite progressive. It did wake people up, so to speak, and about our conditions and that they were not like being trans. So there was some good which came out of intersex. Using the terms like DSD, umbrella terms like DSD or CCSD, as Alex days go by uses, with those terms are not safe still. The gender ideologists will colonize anything and everything. They won't stop. They're using intersex at the moment. They're already using DSDs and making out that being trans is a type of DSD. And it's like, I mean, I think Cynthia and I have seen this. I think Freya has as well. And we've been like, well, no, they're not. Trying to explain what, the crucial difference is. But I believe the only way we can actually sort this mess out is to reclaim. I hate the term intersex. Don't get me wrong. I hate it. It's a misnomer. It causes more issues. But I believe in reclaiming Ray, who's Aphrodite's offspring, who has PACE. She's turned around and said, no, we need to reclaim this term. I know she hates it as well, but we need to reclaim intersex, even though it doesn't really mean anything to any of us, especially women like Katie, whose conditions aren't even intersex. It's like MRKH has nothing to do with, intersex. It's just a reproductive condition.
Katie's about to rip your head off for that one. Just so you know, Katie's about to rip your head off for that.
Oh yeah, Katie will bite. I know. I know Katie's opinion on intersex terms. I totally agree with her. But I just think that the only way to deal with these gender activists, and some of the trans ideologists out there, is to reclaim these terms back from them and say, no, this is not what it means. And basically use it for historical knowledge and say, this is what it used to mean. This is the historical connotation of this term, and take it back from them forcefully if necessary. I mean, mind you, my body wouldn't cope with that. But in terms like intersex really don't help individuals like myself, because it does try to make out we're something we're not, and it's all for sociological identity and feelings, and it's not clinical medical science. Intersex is a non-medical term. It's not, it's nothing. It's just a political identity, I guess, in a way, which was used in the 80s and 90s, and it was an umbrella term for numerous conditions, and I just find it funny when people nowadays on Twitter go, oh, I'm intersex. And I'm sat there thinking, yeah, so, I mean, I can say that, I don't know, I've got one of the 100 different issues with disabilities going. It's like someone saying, oh, I've got a disability. And people are like, oh, what's that then? It's the same thing with intersex. If someone goes, oh, I'm intersex, you're thinking, well, what is it? Because there's over 40 different conditions and each one is different. There is a severity factor within each one. Like there are some men with Klinefelter syndrome that don't really display any symptoms. Some are very lucky and are even fertile, who have the most mildest versions of Klinefelter. So, it's even within each condition, there is a severity factor. So saying one is intersex is not helping anybody. How is that helping to spread awareness? And it's one of the things I always ask the intersex activists out there. I say, why do you say that? Why can't you just say what your condition is? Because it'll make things 100 times easier for everybody else. But no, they won't. And the majority of the time is because they don't have a DSD condition. They're just using it as some sort of dubious form of gender identity, which is just adds more insult to injury, really, to people with DSDs and those who are technically have intersex with ambiguous genitalia. So it's not nice to those individuals either. But yeah, I just thought I'd say about that, how dubious a lot of these intersex organizations are out there. They're the term intersex, it is not helpful in any way or means, definitely.
I just wanted to add quickly, and Katie, I will let you go. So I did want to respond to chat. It's the Dominican Republic that has a concentration of a higher percentage of the population with a DSD. It is very similar to 5-ARD, but they call it, there's a Spanish word for it specifically for that condition. And intersex, quote unquote, was actually a term that was used after the term hermaphrodite, right? So before the term, quote unquote, intersex, we would have the conditions were called, quote unquote, true hermaphroditism or pseudo hermaphrodite. And the reason why these conditions should not be called these things is because hermaphrodite has a very specific meaning in biology, in which an organism is both male and female, simultaneous hermaphrodite, and or sequential hermaphrodite, which is like a clownfish, which is when you can go from one sex to the other. Humans, again, and we've learned this specifically by a deeper understanding of DSDs, have developmental pathways that are not congruent to hermaphroditism, right? Because of the way our development is mutually antagonistic, it does not like and cannot produce both gametes in one individual, right? We are a gonochoric species. So, and that is something that has been, proven with DSDs, right? Because if there ever was a possibility where there's a human that could be both sexes, well, the closest thing would be, somebody that has both gonadal tissues. And even then, they cannot perform both male and female roles in reproduction, right? They cannot produce both eggs and sperm. Our development is not like that. So, understanding DSDs, we have to understand the evolution of humans and developmental pathways of humans. So it goes back to that. And again, this just proves how robust our development is, because you have over 40 conditions, and yet even though there are human beings with these 40 conditions, you still end up with males and females, albeit some are atypical males and females, right? But you will still recognize this person, had everything been functioning, would have produced eggs. This person, if everything were properly functioning, would have produced sperm. And I also hate the infertility, quote unquote, gambit, because the first thing that comes up when you define sex properly, which is by the production of gametes, they'll go, well, there are people that can't produce gametes, so what about them? And to that I say, infertility is sex specific. And how dare you use the pain of infertility for your validation? That is a bad argument. Drop it. Nobody looked at, anyway, I'm not going to go there, but yeah.
You know what's
I think
interesting
Katie
about
was.
everything?
Yeah, Katie was
Katie
next,
was up
Katie,
next.
and then it'll be your turn, love.
Okay, I'll go quickly. I have about 6 things I'd like to say, but I have them written down in a list so that I efficiently go through them. The first is responding to Nick on Not the Thing You Think. Just like Nick said, there's really one woman who's responsible for allowing intersex activists to hijack MRKH, and she's always been a non-binary, gender non-conforming person, and she's like a far left activist type person, which there's nothing wrong with that, but she's also the reason that happened in 2006, and we were not ever considered an intersex condition before that happened when DSD was created. And the thing that bothers me about that is looking into the Chicago consensus where DSD was created. It was essentially just a group of endocrinologists, and my condition isn't an endocrinological, I don't even know how to say that, endocrinological condition. We don't see endocrinologists, so why are they making decisions about conditions they don't treat? So that's the first thing. I think in creating DSD and then allowing these intersex activists to compete with DSD, like for like, they've just decided to position intersex as a competitive term. We've given them language. We should never have created an umbrella group. It should be 40 different conditions with 40 different names. It'd be much harder to actually organize, to take advantage and exploit people if we hadn't made these umbrella terms, which I think are a stretch because there are some conditions that really don't have anything to do with each other. And then I just would like to address what I consider BS intersex definition from the intersex organizations, where they know if they were to give like a real definition, they'd be called out. So they've now decided anyone with any atypical reproductive development situation at all of any kind is intersex. And that is so absurd and bullshit. And no one calls them out on it. All of the human rights organizations, governments, hospital systems, they've all just kind of gone, oh, okay, sure. And no one's even thought for a second about whether it's actually factual or true or given any critical thinking to it, which leads me to the fourth point, which is there is one website that really bothers me. It's healthychildren.com or org. It's actually a website owned by the American Academy of Pediatrics. It is so incorrect and inaccurate, and I don't know how it's been allowed to stay up, and no one will fix it. It says there are 60 different DSDs, and what they mean is sex isn't clear. And they can't tell if you're a male or a female when you're born. This is despite the fact that most DSDs do not cause ambiguous genitalia and sex is observed correctly. So how is that allowed to happen with the American Academy of Pediatrics? It's absolutely insulting beyond anything else. Then the second to last thing is the Harvard blow up from last week or 2 weeks ago, where Harvard basically said they were training their people at Harvard Medical School about DSDs and an LGBTQ and gender course. I don't understand, and I'm just going to speak from my own diagnosis, why my diagnosis would be taught in an LGBTQ course and not in a course about women's reproductive health, because most women with my condition aren't LGBTQ and have no greater incidence of being LGBTQ than anyone else. And then finally, I just wanted to say, please keep in mind the breadth of DSD conditions. Some of the things we've talked about today are truly horrific and awful, but it's not that deep for everyone. It's not that down the rabbit hole for every DSD. So my DSD sucks. I can't get pregnant and I have to have a surrogate or a uterine transplant. And I was born with a shorter than average vaginal canal, and I had to work through that. But that's it. I mean, it's awful, it's unpleasant, it's unlucky, but it's not deeper than that. It has nothing to do with my gender. It's a birth defect. They don't know what causes it yet. They continue to look. So thank you for those of you who pointed out the needs for research, but they think it could have many different causes, and it could be a combination of genes and environmental causes. And so it sucks, but I feel like sometimes this conversation about DSDs goes in a direction that is just not reflective of reality for many of us. And it feels as though we have no agency over how the category we're forced into is presented or positioned. And so no, Nick, I don't want to reclaim intersex. So anyway, that is all. Thank you. I hope that was fast. And
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Edie. I just want to quickly respond, and I think Nick will agree to this just because you brought up the LGBT. So I'm bisexual, and I have a DSD. Being bisexual has nothing to do with the fact that I have Turner syndromes. It is two different, completely non-related things. I happen to like men, and I happen to like women. It's not that deep. I am both sexualities. I am heterosexual and homosexual. That's why it's called bisexual, by the way. It doesn't have to do with gender. Anyway, so has nothing to do with my sexuality. So that's first off. Second of all, a lot of LGBTIQ plus A orgs, right, will bring up quote unquote intersex. They will not give any funding to any of our needs. They collect money from bringing us up. They do collect money, and none of it goes to us ever. Just so you're aware, right? No, but in reality, that's the reality of it. They're not paying for, any of our, they're not paying the medical bills, or they're not paying for my expensive tutor, because I have Turner syndrome. And so I need to, have extra academic help. They're not paying for that, they're not,
if they do, how are they going to afford breast augmentation for their heterosexual non-DSD having cells? A tutor for a child, plastic breast on my chest. I think we need priorities here, and I need breasts.
Chad, we're not even going there. So no, it is beyond infuriating. I saw from a university that teaches medical conditions, right? A university that teaches young adults to become doctors that will treat patients. Say, literally, I have the PDF, right? And it says, my first introduction to trans healthcare was learning about DSDs. And that is literally on a PDF, right? on a PDF that is meant to train doctors. And it is full of, by the way, inaccurate information about DSDs, right? And so, like, unless
If you could
you,
link that, that'd be great too. Just you
I,
could link that and James links the documentary.
yeah, I will try to find it. But it might have been on my old account though. But when I saw that, I was beyond infuriating. But these are the things, and this is why, people are like, why do you care so much? It doesn't, like, it's not that deep. But it is that deep. Because if I swear to God, if I go to a trained professional physician and they're supposed to know their shit and they're supposed to give me health care, and I say, oh, I have Turner syndrome, and they ask what my gender is, I'm going to pull a casket, because that is not, like, I know that sounds like I'm overreacting, but like it's very like like, you're supposed to know that this impacts female reproduction, and you're supposed to know what male and female are. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to act as though there are more than two sexes. Like, I'm counting on you for my healthcare. You're supposed to know what that means, right? So male and female should be obvious to anybody that is scientifically minded. And no, anybody who knows their shit about DSDs knows that we don't disprove that. In fact, it's the opposite. We highlight it. So
I just want to say something real quick about what you said about how you highlighted. The binary gives us infinite possibilities. I mean, it's through the binary code that I'm speaking to you guys through this phone, right? So it's not that there's just two possibilities, 1010. There's 1011, 10010111. It's different, and so the binary gives us infinite possibilities. So it was kind of inevitable in the end that we would have people who were atypical and out of the binary.
binary made us too. I want that on a shirt. I believe it was Nick and then Freya. Pardon me if I got that wrong.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on what you said about sexuality and DSDs. So, as a gay man, I've not seen any data to link DSDs and sexualities together. There's no data out there to even suggest that I am gay because of my DSD condition. And in the vast reality of things, the majority of those with DSD conditions, they are heterosexual. A lot of them happily married or in heterosexual relationships. James is. I wouldn't want to say on the car kid who's listening in, my good friend, but I believe she is straight, and an egg hunter as well. Our friend with Swire syndrome, I believe she's straight as well. So it's there is a lot of people who are heterosexual with DSD or reproductive conditions. So the whole thing of the LGBTQI, where they include the I, even though it stands for intersex, they know that we all know they're notioning towards people with DSDs. So why are a group of medical conditions being used in the LGBTQI is something else, because our conditions are not sexualities, they're not identities. Why are they in that sort of community? It shouldn't be there. I mean, yes, you're going to have people who are gay or bisexual or trans who have a DSD, but they're two separate issues. I mean, you don't see D for diabetes in the it's not an acronym, isn't it? It's just a load of letters. But it's you don't see D for diabetes there. You don't see MS for multiple sclerosis in there, which is no different. Those conditions are no different, just obviously different systems causing issues to what my issues are. So I don't understand that. Going back, another person who has caused so much harm and influenced organizations like the United Nations is our sworn enemy, Anne Fausto Sterling. There's a lot of things I could say about her. She is not even a developmental biologist. She's not an endocrinologist, and yet for some strange reason she quoted the 1.7%, the one where everyone talks about redheads. It's like she doesn't know what she's even talking about. She didn't even get any data facts from somewhere. She also included those conditions with late onset adrenal hyperplasia, which are not congenital conditions, and make up the vast majority of that 1.7%, whereas the congenital conditions only made up 0.2% or 0.02%. So it's like, we're like, and that's 40 different conditions within that 0.02%, by the way. And then adding on the 1. Oh God, I can't do maths at the moment, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like a huge amount on top of that, obviously, they're not even classed as DSD conditions. Lower isn't a DSD condition at all, and it's very similar to PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. So it's like, we're just like thinking, why is that included? Also, another thing about Anne Fausto Sterling, she also sexualized children with DSD conditions. A lot of, I don't know if people have seen posts from myself and my fellow friends with DSDs, but yeah, Anne Fausto Sterling wrote in her book, Sexing the Body, we all had ambiguous genitalia, but also it's a sexualization of the condition. So yeah, her saying that and advising the UN, the United Nations, of this like totally obscure and obscene figure she's pulled out of thin air, and then using it to try and show how prevalent our conditions are, is just ridiculous, and it's caused so much harm. She also coined the 5 sex theory and herms, merms, and whatever she'd said, and it's so offensive. And yet, so many of these intersex organisations rever her as some sort of prophet, of some sort of genius. And on top of that, the LGBTQI communities all think she's amazing. And it's just like, I'm sat here and a lot of these people don't have DSD conditions. So yeah, it is not great at all. And it's caused just absolute dismay amongst myself and others with DSD conditions and just reproductive conditions. So, it's just a nightmare. But Anne Fausto Sterling has a lot to answer for, and that's something I have thought about in the past. If I hadn't had so much disability in my life and obviously really adverse health, I would have pushed forward and happily come over to the States and take her to account in front of the world, because she has a lot to answer for. She's damaged a lot of people and a lot of and spread disinformation about conditions. So yeah, she I think Turner and Freya would totally agree with me on that. She does need to be hauled in front of a scrutiny and in front of a committee somewhere in America, and needs to be totally exposed of how she's totally manipulated and meddled in things that she has no idea what she's talking about.
She is like Ripley from Ripley's Believe It or Not. She is no, but in all seriousness, she is the P.T. Barnum, right? And we are the freak show. And again, to anybody who actually knows these conditions and is scientifically minded and lived with them and observed them, even, or worked with patients that have them, again, the fact that sex is binary becomes obvious, right? When you, and again, like my whole perspective is I'm missing a chromosome. Well, what does that mean? And where do chromosomes come from? And, and what do they do? When you start answering those questions, it becomes obvious. And there is, I think, some evidence that Anne Fausto Sterling was actually attached to John Money. I'm not 100%, don't quote me on that because I don't have full evidence, but I do have some evidence of that. I believe in one of her statements. But, you know, in all fairness, she has been scrutinized, right, by people who do know their stuff. There's a paper that was on the Billboard that was like, about that 1.7% and Fausto Sterling is claiming, right? And they bring up the issues that we brought up in terms of how is she defining quote unquote intersex conditions. You know, PCOS, LOAH, so late onset adrenal hypoplasia. Sorry if I mulch that, but is not an intersex condition. You know, so it is not a DSD. And that makes up like 1.5 of the percentage of her percentage. The actual percentage, if you were to include all DSDs, right, would be about 0.2% to 0.5, and this is if you're including all of them, right? And then more accurately, any condition that you would consider quote unquote intersex where there's a discordance or where there's ambiguity of sex, would be closer to 0.02, right? So we're talking about very small populations. Again, proving how robust sexual development is. And again, if you are scientifically minded and you ask questions and make observations, right, you're like, well, how come it is such a small percentage? And how come over 99% of people are developing this way, right? That's something that you take a look at. Because that's what's impressive to me, right? Anybody who knows biology, the fact that we have such obvious dichotomy is amazing. The fact that I can pinpoint any characteristic and 99% of the time it will be accurate in defining what sex that person is says something. You know, and that's impressive to me when you're talking about biological systems. Yeah,
nature has put so much emphasis on producing equal amounts of males and females and individuals and making sure that the species can reproduce. And that is amazing that despite that complexity, despite all the genes involved, despite all the molecules involved, and how the sequence has to be done just right, piece by piece, for all the systems to function correctly. Like, despite all that, the end result is consistently males or females. And it is really incredible. And even across species, too, the fact that all these different systems still produce males or females, that is something that needs to be focused on a lot, because that is incredibly, incredibly important. Freya, I think you're next.
Thank you. I wanted to build off of the previous discussion Turner and XXY brought up about the sexuality. We recently found a new mindless argument that's been coming up recently, where they were trying to tie the extra copy of the X or Y chromosome being tied as the gay gene to sexuality. I remember XXY was sitting there getting completely flustered, and rightfully so. I was too, because the argument of the gay gene, I thought we were past this. And even they try to be so future-minded and looking towards progression. We're just going back and having to rehash both arguments over and over again, and it just drives me absolutely crazy on this note. I mean, honestly, how can we go back to the gay gene argument, let alone having an extra copy of a chromosome? How does that even work? Because you have Turner here who's bi, and they aren't lacking in the extra chromosome. That's the problem here, to turn around and be like, that's why she's bi. And this entire argument just keeps getting more mindless. It's like they're spaghetti coating science and just throwing pasta on the wall to see what sticks at this point. Oh, and congratulations again on the baby.
Thanks, Freya.
I just wanted
thank you.
I just wanted to add, sorry, about what Freya just said about the gay gene. This is happening a lot. The gender ideologists keep bringing this up, and it's really interesting because out of the group of friends, I have a good about 40 friends now with Klinefelter. We have a chat group on WhatsApp, and we talk to each other quite a lot. Out of the 40 of us on that chat group, there's only 3 of us who are gay. The rest are all straight men. Most of them are married or, are discussing issues with fertility, the fertility treatments that they're requiring because they want to, they want to have children. Some of them are talking about, because there's been luckily recently there's been publications in the last 2 years to suggest that 50% of all those with Klinefelter can now be successfully treated for fertility issues, so which is brilliant. So obviously we talk about this constantly, and these people bringing up the things about the gay gene, they have no evidence, they have no scientific, clinical, medical evidence whatsoever to suggest this. And also just going on sample sizes alone, I mean, the 40 of us in a conversation, 3 of us are only gay. I mean, that's kind of, kind of speaks volumes, really. That's not true at all. And also what they're trying to do is try to re-tie in DSD conditions into the LGBTQI. They're going to try and bring anything and everything to tie us into the LGBTQI community, so to speak. And, they're just going to use everything. I mean, there's another thing which is happening now, which I believe Paula on here brings up, another good friend, and they're now bringing in religious ties. I mean, not just religious, I mean like full-on cult sort of beliefs, where I've had messages from numerous people, these cultists of gender identity and those sort of beliefs and that sort of LGBTQ cult, which the cultists coming out of it. And they even have listed my condition because apparently I look like Baphomet. So they want to worship my condition, and it just makes me feel sick to my stomach that they're doing this. It's just goes to show the complete and utter lunacy of these people. They have no regard for people with DSD conditions. They either sexualize our conditions, or they kind of tie it in as some sort of supernatural belief of theirs. And it's mind-boggling how, totally deluded these people are, who, and the reason why this is all happening is because of the lack of care, because the lack of this whole care in the community scheme that the West has put out there. They've shut down all these mental asylums down across America, across the United Kingdom here. They've shut down numerous large hospitals, treating a large volume of people with very, destructive mental health conditions. They put this care in the community scheme out, but with the whole thing of care in the community, these people are not taking their medicine. So you're going to see more of this delusion out there. And I know that sounds a bit radical of me to say, but it is the truth, I believe. I believe that, governments have not, they're the problem. They've caused all of this. The governments should have more mental health facilities out there to help treat these people for their delusions. But, we're now seeing all this we're seeing unfold in front of us, I believe, is a direct result of the lack of mental health care happening in respective countries. I think that is what's happening, unfortunately. And a lot of people are now, facing the consequences of this and really suffering from all this nonsense that's happening.
So there definitely is a religious aspect to this, and there needs to be a separation from religion and state. But I think so when I say that, again, the fact that sex is binary and that there's 2 sexes, I will keep saying it, is an evolutionary theory, right? And one that's observable, right? And one that predates us, and one that will be existent after us, right? Whether we give it a name or not, mammals and humans have always, sexually reproduced, and there's always been two sexes even before we had names for them. So, not believing in evolution, you do that by pushing a religion, right? And specific, that it not even Baphomet, but for example, in the play, one of my favorite plays, incidentally, Angels in America, right? There is a character in there that is an angel, and coincidentally, said angel is a hermaphrodite, right? So there's like this, sacred thing that is placed on people with DSDs. There are theories that I've heard theories that Jesus had Turner syndrome. Was a trans man with Turner syndrome. I kid you not. I have seen, people make these theories. And again, these are, religious beliefs. To explain something complicated, right? And simplify it and make yourself sound smart. But,
But you don't understand. We are all the Rebus. We are the divine hermaphrodites. Don't you understand this?
Divine reverse of the binary. Yes. No, but more importantly than that, because I also want to talk about why people are attracted to this religion, and I have a bit of a theory. So, one, Nick, I disagree with you that governments should be coming in and creating better mental health care facilities, because governments are creating the system in which people need or are having trouble with mental health care, right? Because people with mental health issues make better consumers, right? So you got to keep the population like just unhappy enough where they indulge in things that you can be addicted to, right? So you pump them full of drugs, you pump them full of blue light, and and all that to keep us complacent. And this is going to make me sound like a conspiracy theorist, but like you know I don't think the government is our friend, and I don't think big corporations are our friends. And no, I think better mental health care. I don't even know how you would get there, but I really don't trust the government at this point, or big corporations, because they hate us. Ultimately, they hate us, and they just want to take our money and profit from us at the end of the day. And it's infuriating. But religion, right? And this is why I think this religion is so popular, is comforting. Religion offers a sense of community. Religion offers a sense of, moral superiority. Religion offers these things that are very comforting to us, but and we've seen with most organized religions, they too profit off of us. Like, how much power did the church have, right? The institutional church, right? Versus, what they claimed are their values. Well, they didn't get all that power with being good people, right? So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. And yes, this whole idea of intersex and this whole idea that sex is a spectrum is a religious belief. It is not one based off of fact or evidence or understanding of evolution. So, I guess take the comfort in religion, because everyone else is screwing you over too.
Thanks, XO. So I want to open it up to audience questions where you guys can request to speak and then ask a question directed at any of the co-hosts or anyone with a DSD condition, and just keep it brief, and then mute yourself and then allow them to speak, and then we'll continue. Thanks.
Well, I guess everybody was really thorough in answering questions before they were even asked, because nobody's asking any questions. I hope you're all remembering everything and taking notes. It's super good. Love to see people paying attention. But these will be recorded and posted, and we are going to take those recordings and post them up on YouTube, stitched together, so they're not in two parts. And so, yeah, I think overall this was really successful. And thank you to everybody for participating and being so awesome and forthcoming with your information. You guys are obviously better at telling people about this stuff than most medical societies these days. I don't know how to feel about that. It's on one hand, it's a little sad that you guys had to do so much research on your own to like find out and get educated about your own conditions. But on the other, it just goes to show how amazing you are as people. So thanks again, guys, for speaking.
Thank you guys for hosting. I know I talk a lot, and I'm so sorry about that. You can tell I'm genuinely sorry about how much I talk. I did want to bring up, because you guys brought up misinformation, I'll bring up this last point, because it is really upsetting. The people that are supposed to have your back and are supposed to advocate for you, right, aren't. And proof I have of this is there is this organization, Interact, right, in the States. And the leader of Interact literally has the ear of the U.S. government. She has a position in the U.S. government now. Kimberly Zeiselman. And so that, inaccurate definition that Katie was talking about, where anything that is, not perfectly, Jesus Christ, sorry, that was my brat. Okay, so, anybody that is not perfectly XX with perfect female reproduction, this includes like a lot of people, right? Because there's a lot of complications that could happen. And then people that aren't perfectly XY males, right? And again, this includes quite a few people, are now pushed into, right, the category of quote unquote intersex. Which does not help the people it's supposed to help in the first place. And it does not help the people that are pushed into said category. And a lot of vagueness, a lot of misinformation comes from there. So when I say it's institutional, I mean it's institutional. Like the example that I gave before, it's institutional in terms of a university that is supposed to teach medical doctors. It is, and stuff like that. So, yeah, I just want to point that out.
Hey, Jane, did you want to speak?
Hi, yes, thank you. And thank you for the panel of people. It's been incredibly informative. Totally appreciated. Waited for this to come along for ages. And thank you, Zach, for your ongoing efforts, etc., just to try to educate people like me who, and it really is, and you put out a tweet there and I sort of come back with could you make it even more simpler, please? Because I'm at the back of the class and there's just somebody who's actually bloody got 2 A-levels and biology and human biology. It's a shame and it's embarrassment, but thank you over the years, because I started following you 3 years ago as you know. And thank you to each individual. This is a slight follow-up to, I think it's Nick, that XX. Really, really interesting, like many of the panel members. And my question is this, really. You've mentioned about the misinformation and how there is conflation, or things are put vague, or the wrong associations, whether it's unintentional, intentional, or is intentional, and also the outcome and the damage, etc. So I guess my question is, in a dream world where your experience of DSDs, if you weren't spending valuable time and energy trying to fend off this misinformation, what would you rather be doing? Like, for example, would you be raising awareness, or, what would you be doing if this ideology, I'm just umbrellaing this, etc., because I don't want to get into the different streams. I realize all those that have been dragged underneath it in one way or the other, or want to be underneath it, there are different groups, but this is not about them. Yeah? So put the ideology to one side. What would you guys would like to do? So if maybe in terms of raising awareness, whatever. So if maybe that Nick can say something and Exo Turner then can say something in terms of where you'd like to focus your energies.
Okay. God, I dropped to activism last month because I have a lot more health issues going on, and I had some real big stresses last month, which led me to basically a heart attack. So not a massive one, but a minor one, but still nonetheless, obviously that it really affected me. But I wouldn't mind in a personal capacity to raise awareness. But if I have more time, which I've made myself recently, I've made a lot more time, is actually to volunteer more for charity as well, because that's what I do already. But also spending time with family and getting off of, I came back onto Twitter just to be with friends, because there's a lot of friends I don't have on Facebook. So, and just discussing things, and giving more time to discuss things and more ways we can find to support each other and get the right sort of support for our needs. Because even the Klinefelter Syndrome Association in the UK, it's been overtaken by gender ideology activism. In the teenage section now, it talks about how Klinefelter can be viewed as gender identity. And I'm sat there thinking, what's the F? I mean, I had problems with KSA UK last year as well, and really took them to town and said, what they've said is not right. But now they've actually done it, a whole section. They haven't done it at the adults, funny enough. They've done it at the teenagers, which are the most vulnerable grouping, children, basically. So it's really disturbing. I will try and post a link on this account to show the offending pages. But yeah, basically just I would put more time into getting people to support the needs of those of us with DSDs, and just getting people just to realise to lay off. I mean, it's not just gender identity ideologists causing issues as well. Unfortunately, there are some areas of gender criticals causing issues as well now. Unfortunately, only a small minority by the looks of things, but they are attacking women like Egg Hunter, who is listening, who has Swire syndrome, and because she has XY chromosomes, which Zach obviously talks about the science, how it happens. She gets called, there's a lot of people calling her and others with Swire syndrome men, which is not true, because they are biological females. So,
it's they don't have SRY. It's for example, one example is a male gene, SRY. So if you don't have that, you are female, even though, and it's funny you say that, because if you look at somebody's names or what they use, for women, they're put 2 X's, yes, not realizing that some women will have a Y chromosome and that some males will have a XX chromosome, and not realizing it's the SRY, the sex region. Wide,
those conditions. I mean, Swire syndrome and de la Chapelle syndrome, which is, I believe, the condition where males have XX chromosomes. I have to stress they are incredibly rare conditions, and they make up a very small percentage of those of us with DSDs. They're special. There you go, Egg Hunter. I know you like me calling you special, but
XX males are only 1 in 20,000 births.
Yeah, really
males,
rare.
So very rare. Yeah.
So I just it's frustrating. I think thing for me. It's frustrating for people to carry on talking about the genetics of our conditions, although important, or what our bodies look like. And just as case files on here, Claire, who talks about obviously trying to get the right support for our needs. We just wish that people would debate our needs rather than what we look like or what our genetics are, because that's the most important thing for us all, really, is to get those needs and support in place, so we can have better quality of life. That's for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful, thanks. And could I just hear something from Exo Turner in terms of if you weren't fending off the misinformation, etc., that some of us have seen, and you guys are you're at the front of this, what would you otherwise be spending focusing your time and energy?
So, I mean, and I already do. I am a university student, so I am getting my bachelor's in science so that I can become a science teacher, and I work. So my energy is pretty much like, listen, between like trying to keep like a healthy lifestyle, work and school and homework, it's like what time do I have? No, but in terms of, any discussion that I would have, outside of this with Turner syndrome, it would probably be to maybe get, like peer support groups. It would probably be, because most people don't really know about these conditions, so it would probably just have a conversation about it, but without like this misconception of it. Yeah, I mean, I'd just be living my life like I am now, and I just wanted to point out about chromosomes. And I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, or what side of this debate, conversation, dialogue, whatever you want to call it, you're on. Most people don't know what chromosomes do, right? Most people are not trained in genetics and stuff like that. So, like, don't have that conversation. Just be like, because it's just super annoying to hear, oh, well, chromosomes this, chromosomes that. Okay, but like, do you know like what chromosomes are and what they do, and like the specific genes that are on said chromosomes? Because there's like on one chromosome there could be thousands of genes that do many different things, right? They basically create proteins, right? Like that's what they do. But specific genes will create specific enzymes, and it's just annoying. And to egg hunter, right? To just simply say Y chromosome without asking, well, why do we consider the Y chromosome male, right? And what is it that makes the Y chromosome male, and how that does not apply to someone like egg hunter, right? That's the conversation, right? Because that is what happens when oh, wait a minute, this isn't typical and what we expect, and then you ask questions about it, and then you realize, okay, wait a minute, here is what I'm seeing. Most people are not critical thinkers, and besides that, I'm sorry. Sometimes my bitchiness comes out, I'm sorry.
So I can understand it. No, it was just an ask for both of you. I know both of you are like super busy anyway, etc. But when I came onto Twitter 3 years ago and I spoke to somebody called Ray who knew about DSDs, etc., and they were really battling misinformation. I had a lot of time. That's where I started to get to know stuff, to be honest with you. So as I said, in a different world at a different time, what would you be sort of also doing? But thank you very much for both sharing your experience. Massive hugs. Thank you. I give the mic.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for listening.
I think Coco Spice is next with a comment or question.
Hi. Thank you so much for letting me speak. I think it's hi. Honestly, yeah. I mean, I have some of you who are speaking right now. I've followed for quite a while. I think it's really, really unfortunate how people with DSDs have been dragged into and sucked into a political conversation that actually has nothing to do with them, because the issue is about gender identity and the impact of that on women's spaces. Predominantly, and also the instrumentalization of LGBT children in the form of the so-called like trans kid. But it's honestly quite appalling how people who have medical conditions that actually could, I appreciate the fact that maybe I'm possibly one of the most left-wing people on this speaker panel right now. I don't know, but I definitely do feel like it is the job of society to be investing into much better medical care for people with DSDs, and in general for human beings, to be quite honest. I have seen, I don't want to say the DSD community because that just sounds absolutely ridiculous, but people with DSDs have been weaponized by people on all sides to push their own agenda. And it actually has been incredibly, from my perception, been quite dehumanizing to the individuals who are actually living with these disorders of sexual development. And we could do well to remember that these are actually people who are struggling with disorders and conditions that are not just limited to reproductive implications, that they do have implications for other health issues and learning disabilities as well. And I think people should remember that they are actually like people. They're not pawns to be used in a debate that actually originally has nothing to do with them. And I think it's really depressing when I see people who are claiming to speak for me as a gay transsexual, like these. I like what you say, Turner, because you don't refer to them as trans activists. You refer to them as gender identity essentialists, which I would actually agree with that, to be quite honest, because they don't do anything for people like me. They certainly don't speak for me, what I would want. They definitely do have a very essentialist and conservative, stereotypical, bastardized interpretation of what they think gender is. And I just, even today, to this day, I still see on like Twitter all the time, when we as sane thinking human beings make the argument that sex is obviously binary. There are men and women, there are males and females, and it's just within 2 seconds there's always some like DSD condition or person with a DSD that is weaponized and co-opted and thrown into the argument in order to try and disprove the sex binary, which is just, you'd have to have an IQ level close to the temperature of the inside of a refrigerator to think that there's more than 2 sexes. But also they deliberately do know what they're doing. They know fully well that they are just co-opting and actually appropriating people with DSDs. But I also do see a little bit of, I don't know if I would call it ableism or ignorance from the other side as well, where people, particularly people who have androgen insensitivity syndrome, have been actually quite caught up in a lot of arguments and quite horrid polemics in this so-called debate. And it really has been very dehumanizing. And there have been like people who've actually been driven off social media because it's gotten that ugly and that horrible. And it's just absolutely appalling. These are human beings. They're people. They have nothing to do with transgender. They have nothing to do with gender identity ideology. And they also, we as a society should be, supporting them and, pushing for better medical care, more medical research, greater, obviously me as a leftist, I would say greater public spending, large, socialized medicine for all, which you guys lack in the States. And even over here in the UK, there needs to be so much more research done on variations of sexual development so we can actually get these people, medical treatments and services that benefit them, that help them, that improve their lives, and so that they also have bodily autonomy and actually are not just operated on and surgically altered when they're infants, without their consent. They need to be given the autonomy to consent if they want to undergo any kind of like gonad removal or genital surgery, and that is up to those individuals. So yeah, thank you so much for letting me speak. I appreciate the fact I don't have a DSD. So thank you so much for like giving me so much time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next is James, and then Katie.
Thank you again. Yes, H did bring up a few good points. Unfortunately, for instance, when Kasia Semenya, I believe that's her pronounce her name, gets brought up. I mean, this is a class of DSDs are so rare. They only appear in small quantities in certain African countries. They are something that no one has to worry about except in high-level sports, particularly on the Olympics, where I do agree they need to be regulated in some way. But that's it. They don't. There's no threat to anybody. No women's spaces. There's they're just they're heavily demasculinized males, or they are or they have other conditions or other strange conditions that are so rare. So rare we don't really understand them because we can't research them because they're so damn rare. They just pop up occasionally. So, and people on a GC side talk to them like they're your next door neighbor or something. I'm like, no, they're not. So just you got to keep that in perspective. And also, the LGBTQ kind of conglomerate is a real clever trick because it's like you criticize any aspect. And it's like, no, I'm not talking about gay people. I'm not talking about lesbians. I'm just talking about this specific issue over here. But they automatically throw it in that to think you're like fighting like queer people, and no one knows what queer is. I'm not talking about lesbians. I haven't talked about lesbians for years. Okay, so that's the other problem. So there's a lot of conflation going on. There's a lot of this identity. I call them identity snatchers. They just snatch everybody's identity, and then they claim things. And this was brought up certainly with first it popped up with Dalzal, the one who pretended to be African American. Again, that offended people because it's like a person just can't take a little aspect of somebody's existence and say, I'm this. I want to have this part of this existence, but I don't want anything else. I want to throw everything else away. So I don't have to grow up black. I don't have to grow up anything. I have to deal with anything except I want to just deal with this one little aspect of it, and I want to benefit from that little aspect of it, and I don't want to deal with all this other stuff. So when they claim to have things like, some strange condition, they're not dealing with fertility issues. They're not dealing with any of this stuff. They just like that identity and to claim that identity and to profit that identity. I think eventually it's going to come around and people are going to look back at this and it's going to be like one of those pictures, you look at, you stare at for hours and hours and can't see it, and suddenly it becomes clear. I forgot. I'm old, so they're big in the 90s. But and then people would realize, I see what's going on. It's just we're just simply co-opting things and then creating another victim class and then doing exactly what we claimed that we weren't doing. We weren't supposed to culturally appropriate without permission. We're not supposed to steal people's valor or stolen identities or anything like that and do these things. So anyway. Okay, so I believe Truth and Facts are next.
Thanks, James. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm on the exercise machine because the gym closes at 6. I just wanted to say one thing about variations. People who know me know I have a real problem with quote-unquote variations. Variation is entirely meant to make it sound like these are just natural versions of male and female without causation. And if you have that, you can place them on a sex spectrum because they're just a collection of sex characteristics, randomly assigned. My uterus and lack of most of it is not a variation. It is a reproductive disorder that has led to my complete inability to get pregnant despite being very fertile otherwise. It's so cruel and unfair and dismissive to the actual truth and experience of women with my diagnosis. That's all. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Katie. EXO?
I'm with Katie on that one 100%. And sorry, guys. For those of you who know me, my phone dies at the worst possible time. So, pardon. Yeah, so I also hate the term variation. And it is, again, for me, I like when words are explanatory, when they're descriptive, and it tells you without having to dive into it. So, for example, if I were to say, oh, I have female hypogonadism, right? You can then, figure out that there's an issue with the development of my ovaries, right? Automatically it's there. And variation is just, again, it's another umbrella term. It's another, hypocritical slap to the face, because you're like, oh, you're so, perfect the way you are. You're just a variation. And, you're this beautiful, sacred breaker of the binary. And then you go ahead and tell other people that they need like surgery and hormones so that they're okay. Like it's again, it's the double standard for me. And then I also wanted to touch upon nomenclature, since we're talking about words and specificity. Assigned does not apply to sex unless you are a victim of medical malpractice. The doctor did not assign my height, my weight. The doctor did not assign, my hair color. Those are things that were observed and recorded, right? And the whole point of taking the word assigned is manipulation of words, because it is saying that this was chosen and given to you and by the doctor, like the doctor made the choice. The doctor did not choose your sex for you. The doctor did not assign, again, unless you are a victim of medical malpractice, right? And that's why that term exists in the first place, for victims of medical malpractice, which, by the way, most of us with DSDs were also just simply observed and recorded our sex, right? So even that is not applicable to majority of DSDs, right? So you're talking about a very specific experience, and you are colonizing that, taking the language meant for that, and then manipulating it for political reasons. And it's just, I can't explain what it's like when you've lived with a condition and you see someone blatantly make like a TikTok, right? And this is how I got started. And just like a TikTok or like a Twitter post of like, actually there's like 6 sexes, and they name your karyotype, which is not a sex, it's an atypical karyotype, as a sex. And the idea of a sex spectrum also upsets me a lot, because you cannot put sex on a spectrum. First of all, sex does not apply simply to humans, right? Because we know the definitions of male and female, and where sex and what sex is. You cannot put it on, you cannot take simple human characteristics and then say it's a spectrum, which is what they do, right? Also, if it is a spectrum, what is your X and Y axis? Right? What are you measuring? How are you measuring maleness and femaleness? Right? Because that's what they put like male to female, and then they just slap intersex in the middle, right? And they're done I'm like, but that's not a spectrum, right? You have you don't have, again, you don't have your quantities that you're measuring, right? Because how do you measure maleness? Like, are you measuring the size of penis and like saying that's a spectrum? Because that's where, like, no, but that is literally where the idea that is a spectrum comes from. If you read Anne Fausto Sterling, who kind of started this whole idea that sex is a spectrum, right? If you like, that's basically her logic, and it's like that's not how we define and understand and measure sex. You can't measure sex. That's not how it works.
Yeah, sex is a discrete variable, and it cannot be plotted on a spectrum. Certain traits can be plotted on a spectrum, like height, weight, hormone levels, even genital morphology if you get a specific unit that applies correctly. But those are all separate traits. You can't just mold them together into one spectral smoothie. Like, it's just not how it works. Yeah, that was the main thing I want to say. So from there, let's go to, I know Nick wanted to speak really quick, and then Freya as well. And then after that, I want to just one more time ask the audience if there's any questions. So be thinking about questions, and then we'll wrap this up soon.
Yeah, I was just going to come off of Turner's points about, social media, where on TikTok they'll talk about the sex spectrum and just talk about bollocks and basically, excuse my language. But one of the things is a lot of these people who claim to be intersex are faking it. They are saying they're intersex or anything like that, or saying they have DSD conditions to spread their genderqueer ideology. And people need to just challenge them, because anybody with a legit DSD condition, like myself, like Turner, like Freya, James, Katie, Egg Hunter, and other speakers that have been on today, we know what our conditions are. We're very specific about what our conditions are. For example, I talk about Klinefelter. Turner talks about, it's in the name, Turner. Freya talks about her having 48XXXY, which is an extra X than I've even got, and so forth. We all talk about it in precise detail because, it is our life experience. It is also part of our, we've had diagnosis. We've been, my endocrinologist has talked me through about my condition. I've been given books. I've gone to, support organisations like the KSA UK, even though I disagree with them about things at the moment. But there is, I know what my condition is and how it affects me. A lot of these people faking our conditions don't. They have no idea. There is one notable one which I've taken on when I was an activist, called Julie Mayfield in America. Now, Julie Mayfield is a trans woman, claims to be an intersex, claims they're not trans, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's clear you are. And Julie Mayfield claims to have 47XXY Klinefelter syndrome, exactly the same condition as what I have, but has tried to claim that that they have fallopian tubes, uterus, one ovary, one testy, partial uterus, and a female pelvic floor, whatever that means. It's just mental. And these traits do not happen for whatever reason under 47XXY Klinefelter. It's just not possible. They do not, categorically do not happen. And it just proves how many fakers there are out there. There was a proper autogynephile up in Scotland who claimed to have a rare condition, which was case with XXY, and tried to say it was Klinefelter. There's only been one condition that's been found of this in Poland, in a teenager who was diagnosed when they were 15 at the time. They're now about 19 or 20 years of age. And this gender ideologist is 60 years old this year. So it goes to show that, only one case being recorded in medical modern science in the medical books. And apparently they've all got it all of a sudden. So this is the thing what people got to be aware of. They will try to claim, there's another one claiming to have is it chimerism? Is that how you say it? Where they have an extra...
Chimerism.
That's it. Chimerism. And yet that, again, is an extremely rare condition to have. It's not really considered a DSD, but does have perhaps an underlying DSD condition going alongside it. It is so rare, but they will try to make out they're between sexes because of that, and it's not at all. When you look at the science behind it, even the science behind that is just not possible. So these fakers are numerous. I mean, at the moment, when Claire Case Files did her article about the invention of intersex last year, it was an eye-opener. It was fully backed up with documents, showing how our conditions have been totally manipulated, totally twisted, and the amount of people faking our conditions in order to spread genderqueer theology. And it was so shocking how much of a trend this has become. And it's just a massive insult to people like me who have had to endure struggles, and real struggles, throughout my life, and pain and, all sorts that I've had to deal with my condition. And then for them just to kind of go, oh yeah, look at me, I'm intersex. And it's like, no, you're not. You don't even know what that term means. It's just pathetic. And it's got to the point now, even though I'm not an activist anymore, but from a personal perspective, I'm still pissed off seeing it all, because it's never going to end. I just cannot see it ending. And it's not going to end well if it does. It's really scary, in my opinion.
All right, go ahead, Freya, and then we got a question from one of the audience members, I think.
Okay, thank you again. What gets me is, it started off as just a spectrum. It wasn't defined. It was just a spectrum, and they kept ham-handing more and more genders into that spectrum and conflating it more, but it had nothing to ground it in scientific reality. And it was only recently, based upon an article that came out with the bimodal spectrum. And it was just to prove their argument for the spectrum. And you, Emma, Hilton, and Colin did amazing. And you obviously, I know I quote you all the time to people who try to argue with me on bimodal. And it's just, like I said, them just throwing science at the wall to see what sticks at this point. And they conflate biological sex now with the bimodal to justify other genders and hundreds of genders. Look at New York. Last time I checked, it was 75 genders in New York, including drag queen. And it's like, are you kidding me? and dogkin and catkin. And it's just gotten so much worse. I know several of us here remember the conversation with Penelope. I think it was Penelope P something, or PNE or something like that. And she claimed to have two rare DSD conditions that didn't pair together. And maybe one of you guys can, if you remember which two she claimed she had. I don't remember off the top of my head. But she claimed that she physically was capable of birthing and fathering children. And at the age of 4, her parents made a decision for her and removed her ovaries, and turned around and was claiming that they never went through a male puberty, and then admitted that they fathered a son on top of everything else. And it's I don't even, one of the conditions you cited would make you sterile. So I don't understand how you could father a child in the first place at this point. And everyone here, Turner, Cynthia, Katie, have heard me cry so much about not being able to have children, and how that's affected me growing throughout my life and taking care of my nephews. And another point to me being against children transitioning is how many friends I've had growing up, including myself. I didn't want kids as a teenager, and it wasn't till my 20s and 30s, after helping raise my nephews for 6 years, I was I would love to be able to have a kid. I really would. And to never have that, and see children falling into the space and being told they can make a decision at 10 and younger that they can transition and have their puberty blocked with GnRHA, and how that will affect them growing up, and thinking that at 10, even at 15, making that choice, and not understanding the long-term consequences before they even have those emotions develop in them to want to have children or to have the experience of helping raise children. And it's just so horrible seeing it, everything being done, and especially to kids, and how everything has just been so poorly panned out in the long run with what you would expect to be happening in 2023. And instead of having the truth and people being grounded in that truth, we have everybody conflating it in the world, including the medical professionals. Makes it even more scary and disgusting that we have this happening. And having Ann Fausto Sterling in her book, like Sexting the Body from, I believe, 94, and how she started that whole process. And like all of us have admitted several times in our lives, all of us have suffered neurological divergence. All of us had learning disabilities. I have dyslexia. I'm on the autistic spectrum. I was in special ed growing up throughout school. And then to see our conditions fetishized sexually, and nobody calls them out for that. And it's horrible. It really is.
So, Dee Dee brought up this point earlier, and there's a few things I want to talk about. First of all, someone claiming to have their ovaries removed and then say they didn't go to male puberty is just like, of course you didn't go through male puberty. If you had listen, I don't have time to waste on those, like, I can't wrap my head around it, and that makes me angry. So we're gonna move past that. And we're just going to say that, give me 1 second and I will be right back. I'm sorry, I need 2 minutes. Hold on.
Hey, Reason Will Win, you can ask your question or comment.
Hi, Zach. By the way, I used the I summon Zach feature for the first time the other day. I really appreciate that. It's very helpful. I felt like I was calling on Batman. But is this an appropriate time to ask a question about gender, or is it too out of topic?
I don't think so necessarily. Let's see. We'll try to answer it.
What exactly is happening with the gender issue? Is it akin to Mott and Bailey, where the sex spectrum idea was no longer defensible and, warranted a retrieve towards that, gender, which is more muddy, as you put it? What's exactly going on with gender and it, being claimed to be a spectrum and whatnot?
Yeah, in one way, it is a Mott and Bailey in that they will say, they'll basically conflate sex and gender and say that their sex also changes, because they like to use that argument as the strong argument of like, no, actually I am male or female, actually the opposite sex. But then they'll also say, when challenged, they'll be like, actually no, sex and gender are separate. My gender identity is male, my sex is female, that kind of thing. And that is a Mott and Bailey. That's used a lot. And
so it's
there is a distinction, though.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good.
So it's a sort of ambivalent term that is used according to the needs, somewhat?
Yes, absolutely. So you'll see gender being used in various ways for various purposes, depending on the person's ideology. So you might see them using gender identity, like their perception of themselves as male or female. They might use that as a complete replacement for sex, so basically conflating the two together, or they might keep it separate. They might use gender to mean gender as synonymous with sex, just saying that your gender is your sex, and there's no difference between the two. And there's also gender expression, with how you express yourself, masculine and feminine roles and behaviors and cultural practices, and all those different terms are just muddied together often with gender ideologues, and they don't often bring much clarity to those terms. So I find it's best to ask them, when they are using the word gender, to clarify what they mean exactly.
So, is there a version of this gender which is grounded in one's biology, perhaps similar to how Deborah saw would say, for example, that it is also binary?
So, if we're defining gender as more of the behavioral expression of male and female, you can define it that way, and that is partly biological in nature and partly sociological. So there's that aspect. If you're defining gender as in relationship to sex, only sex, then it's just binary. I think Cynthia has something to add.
In California, actually, I just saw this. Civil Code 51 defines gender and by extension sex, actually. So it defines sex as including but not limiting a person's gender. But then it also says that gender also means sex and includes a person's gender identity and gender expression. And then it defines gender expression as a person's gender-related appearance and behavior, whether or not stereotypically associated with the person's assigned sex at birth.
Yeah.
So it is just nonsense.
Yeah, so it's like, what
it's
is
a
gender
matrushka, nestled matrushka mess.
Yes, exactly. It's like, what is it? The Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail. It's just the circular definition that relies upon itself to exist. Like, it can't exist without its own, like, words and definitions.
And none of these definitions that they've made up for gender, none of those can exist outside of sex. Like, they're using sex as the basis to then jump off from and create definitions from that are circular.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right, who's next? I'm not sure.
I just
You're double miking because Cynthia's mic's open. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly interject, and I'll move on. So, I was gonna say, because somebody had mentioned that drag queen was a gender. Drag queen, I know some drag queens that would be very upset if you said that. It's not. And as for what gender, quote unquote, is, so this is my personal observation. Take it or leave it, right? So, like I previously said, there are sensations that we know are tied to male and female sexual development. So like James was talking about, Kalman's impacting your sense of smell, and Turner's can impact your hearing. I think males and females have a somewhat different reality when walking through the world, and this leaves with two averages of of patterns that are recognizable, because humans are sexually dimorphic and we're a social species. So we take the reality of the fact that we're sexually dimorphic species, and we take that and we kind of build some social foundations with that. On a personal level, I think we're all non-binary, because every person that I've spoken to and have experiences with has characteristics about them behaviorally that I would, that are masculine, that are feminine, that are neither, and that are both at the same time, right? So it's, so there, it's very, gender is hard to discuss. If you are going to discuss it, it should be, again, tying back to evolution, right? And the evolution of the two sexes. And then, you can criticize, for example, social hierarchies. From there, you can, examine how, sorry if you heard that, that's my cat being a brat. So you can you can examine, social hierarchies and stuff like that. But what's funny is that we always think that humans are special, because, again, this goes back to like how I learned about all this stuff, and it was watching nature documentaries. And when they were talking about, the habits of lionesses versus what lions do, there was no judgment. There was no, oh, it's like complex. Like it was, you know what I mean? We spoke about the observations as, observing animals and patterns. And so, I don't understand why we treat humans as like, above that. Um, um, so yeah, like I think it's nature and nurture impacting each other. I would say that, like, that's how I would explain gender, but it is
Yes.
tied to
And
sex.
nature has to exist as the baseline for nurture to act, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Katie?
Yes, thank you, Zach. I might struggle just a little bit to articulate what I mean, and I don't think what I'm about to say is like news to anyone. It's just nice to surface what really I think causes a lot of the challenges that we're talking about. So one of the things that happens on a regular basis is, activists trying to say that someone with a DSD, they'll say, well, then a woman with MRKH isn't a woman because she can't give birth. So I guess she's not a woman. And so that goes back to this like very odd situation where they've divorced. It's the center of everything. The movement that is about transgenderism is about supposedly about gender. Okay, so then the people that disagree are focused on saying there is no gender. Gender is the same, like gender is inherently connected to sex. Okay, so if gender is inherently connected to one's sex, then they'll say, oh, well, is this person really a woman if they can't give birth, or if they don't have this, or whatever. And it's like so frustrating because you're really trying to say that women who don't have a gender non-conforming, whatever you want to call it, are divorced from their sex. And so this is the central tension and the central issue that we can't seem to resolve, which is, the fact that most non-transgender people honestly accept that trans people want to live as the opposite sex, but that they aren't the opposite sex. And so the idea that you could, so I said to someone the other day, okay, so you're saying because I have uterine infertility that I am a female, but I'm not a woman. So up until now, the only way a female wouldn't be a woman is if they said they were a trans man. So it's like so absurd, the like inherent insanity of it all. And so I'm just not really sure how it gets better, because I don't know how to get out of the swirl that I'm sort of talking around here that I'm not doing a very good job of.
I agree. As a man with a DSD condition, I just want to put it out there that gender, I personally,
And I'm done,
if
by the
people
way.
want to have a gender, was that? I was going to say, I don't mind people of gender identity. If they want to identify as whatever they want to, go for it. That's up to them. I'm not taking that away from them. I'm not doing anything. But what I hate, and I hate the most, is for some of these people to start preaching at me what I am, or saying that I must be of this, I must be of that, or I'm not male enough, I'm not 100% male. Now that really pisses me off. One of the things we hear quite a lot is trans men are men. We hear that constantly. But when they talk about me, they'll talk about me when I'm not there, or talk about me in person, and they'll say, well, Nick's got Klinefelter syndrome, he's got an extra X chromosome, so that extra X means it's female, so therefore he's not 100% male. And I'm sat there thinking, what are you talking about? It's the pure hypocrisy when they talk about misgendering and then they go and missex me. Okay? It is pure hypocrisy. And they need to stop it, because it's causing a lot of issues. I don't identify as male. I am a male. my male sex is no different to a male with XY chromosomes or a male with XXXY chromosomes. We're not all little variants out there. We're not on this spectrum. Our sexes are still, the sex is the same. We just have reproductive disorders. And I'm a realist. I talk about my condition in the clinical terms because it's easier for me to do so, because that's how I was diagnosed. That's how I get the medical treatment for my needs. And I appreciate that's not for everybody, but for me it is. And I don't wish to enforce my way of thinking on others. But the problem is they've now turned my condition into this sort of somewhere in between male and female, when clinically, medical science speaking, it only affects males, regardless of what those males identify as, if they are transgender, if they identify as non-binary, if they identify, identifying as something else does not change the clinical medical reality of my condition. Okay. And those conditions that they may identify as that. That's fine. That's no problem. I have no problem with that. But they cannot change those definitions, because the problem is it'll go into the medical system, right? It'll go into the medical system. If enough of them did that, got into the medical system, I could see medical privileges being taken away from me, because they'll be like, oh no, it's just an identity. Don't worry. You just embrace your identity. You don't need these medical treatments because your condition is just a gender identity now. And it could easily turn into that. So we need to be realistic here. Now, I don't mind people who have DSDs who may be trans, and there is people here today. Freya is in the room today. Freya has a DSD condition and is a trans woman. I love her to pieces, like a big sister to me. So I have a lot of nuance there to understand that. But as myself and Freya have often talked about, a DSD condition and being trans with gender dysphoria or having a gender identity, they're two different things, and two very separate issues. My condition has nothing to do with gender identity. It's nothing to do with being gay. It's nothing to do with LGBTQ. Even as a gay man, my medical condition, under the pretense of intersex, is not an identity or a sexuality. It is a medical condition. And as I've said before, why don't they add D into the LGBTI for diabetes? Because it's no different to that. It's a reproductive condition. But if you look at it in a medical sense, it's no different. So it's it's a medical condition. It's just frustrating. It really is. There is a lot of hypocrisy about, and gender ideology, not people individually who have gender identity or who may be trans. I'm not targeting them, but it's the ideology. It's the political ideology that's causing a lot of issues. And it's really dehumanizing towards men with DSDs and females with DSDs, and even those who identify as something else with DSDs. It does affect them, because at some point something's going to go wrong in the medical system, especially in America or into any private healthcare in countries that are based that on, because the medical community will start pandering to this political ideology, and people will lose their rights into getting medical treatments for their conditions. Regardless, it doesn't matter if you're a man with a DSD or a female with a DSD or somebody who identifies as whatever, they're going to be affected as well, no matter what. They will lose their medical rights to getting medicine or possible surgeries to remove, tumours, because some of our conditions cause cancer. It's one of the things I'm on the list for, which I have to have checked, is my testes and the gynecomastia I have, because the breast growth I have a high risk of developing breast cancer. So, our conditions cause a lot of issues. It's just so difficult. It's just got to a point now where one gets very exhausted. With it's the political aspect of it which is causing the issues. I'm quite convinced of it. It's just not good at all.
So from the audience, we have Dill Scout with a comment or question, and then Michael with a comment or question. EXO, I would go ahead and speak if you need to say something.
Yeah, so in here, Nick, what you were describing is why I have a problem with the term variation, right? Because a lot of the struggle with having our medical conditions is having people understand us, right? And that is not helped by the vague language. That is not helped by the forced teaming of like all these conditions under one umbrella. So, for example, if you were to use the term quote unquote intersex, that does not tell me anything about you. It doesn't, right? If you were to say, woman with Turners, man with Klinefelters, man with Kalmans, whatever, condition you may have, right? Then at least that is descriptive and, accurate in terms of, and tells people, communicates with people, right? Our experience, right? And a lot of people's perception, right, of quote unquote intersex is not based in empirical data. In fact, it is based off of fetishization. It is based off of the idea, no, like in all seriousness, though, I mean, how many times have Nick or Freya or James or I have come across these accounts with drawn with drawings of people, not even people sometimes, but like these cartoons with both genitals, right? Like that is where people are getting these, like, in all seriousness though, like some of this is where people are getting their ideas, and it's not, it has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with the reality of our developmental complications and how they impact our life. And I know a lot of us like are worried, and rightfully so. There's some things being put into law that are that will have that predictable scary outcomes, and I'm not saying don't fight it, but I also kind of want to ease any fear that people have, because again, like how we got here. Hold on a second. What the hell are you doing? Sorry. Jeez. Sorry.
Somebody's heart meter is a little low.
Oh my god. Anyway, so so that yes, okay, I want to ease people's fear. Right. So the fact that sex is binary, again, preludes us by 1.2 billion years, and it will be here after us. So, even with all of this happening to kind of poke holes in, the terms male and female and deconstruct them, because ultimately that's what this activism aims to do, is deconstruct these terms. We will have to deal with the consequences of that, and then it will, reality will have to, sit back in with people. Because, like I said, like the doctor told me, either this is hormonal and we can treat it, or it's genetic and, there's nothing you could do. Now, I could go ahead and walk around like I don't have Turner syndrome and, live in, in ignorant bliss, but then then the consequences of that will eventually happen, and where, I have to deal with the medical complications of not being vigilant with my healthcare, right? Of not knowing, what, yeah. So it's the same thing here, right? There's only so much that, be nice can get you, right? And nice is different than good. Because I could be nice and be affirming and be understanding, and sometimes I am all of those things, but I would be a bad person if I were to lie to you. I would be a bad person if I were to say that I think it's a good idea for, or that I believe in this, and that's why these conversations are important. And the fact that gender isn't clear is like part of the problem, and also it's in the design of what this activism aims to do. And when you're talking about sexual development, remember, you're talking about the process. You're talking about two things. You're talking about the process of how a child becomes an adult, and then you're talking about the process of how we create other human beings, right? And all of those two things have huge political, social, personal consequences. And again, it all goes back to two different types of cells: a large sessile, there you go, I remembered the word, a large sessile gamete and a small motile gamete. And all of the other, perhaps observably bimodal consequences all link back to that binary. Yeah.
I think we have Michael Shaw for a comment or a question, and then we'll go to Hi, I'm a Chicken.
Hi, I'm going through the process of getting my diagnosis at the moment, and I'm just wondering if anybody else has had the experience of the doctors very quickly and very willing to jump to surgeries and the hormones, despite my reservations, despite my saying, no, slow down. They seem to be just pushing me towards what they believe I should be taking, and I don't know, has anyone else felt like this before? Has this problem come up? The doctor's making me really nervous, and she won't, like, there's something in my groin area that she won't tell me what it is. She was very avoidant of any questions, but she was really happy to jump to, oh, let's get you a general surgeon and let's get you the hormone treatments. And I just freaking out and wondering if anyone else has had this experience, or is there a better way to deal with it, or yeah, that's it.
If you are uncomfortable with your physician's care, I please implore you to go and get a second opinion, right? If you're, so that's first off the bat. And that's kind of, I don't want to put you on the spot because there's like private information that you might be giving out. So just, I would get a second opinion. I don't know in terms of what you mean by diagnosis. I'm not sure what all that is. Like I said, that's personal information. So, but yeah, just get a second opinion. If you are uncomfortable at all with your physician, go see others, right? You have that right as a patient, right?
And responsibility, legitimately. Never rush in. I can only assume what you're meaning completely, Michael. I've seen you like and follow my comments around for a while now, but I wouldn't express to rush in. I 1,000,000% agree with Turner. Get a second opinion before they rush you into anything to make sure that you're making the most informed choice, because the doctors won't give you informed consent when it comes down to these choices. It all depends on where they're at and what ideological camp they belong to. If they believe in biology, or if they believe in gender ideology, or if they're just there to grease their own pocket at that point.
And I hate to tell anybody to spend more money on medical care. It does stack up, especially when it comes to testing and labs. And you have to keep going into the doctor and then get results for them. And it just adds more expense, which I hate doing that to people, especially from my own experience. And now I'm still paying off medical bills and still need to add more to it. But I would definitely make... just based on the information you get a second opinion, make sure before you make a choice. If you're talking about them pushing you into transition, that happens a lot. And I've heard more than my fair share. And I've even had experiences myself where they're always wanting to promote that. And how many children I've talked to and heard that got pushed in that space. And there's so much going on that's messed up. Like, I could sit here and do a whole space on that for over an hour on just that argument alone. But please take care of yourself. No one's going to take greater responsibility for your care than you can.
Thank you, Michael. We got Hi, I'm a Chicken as the next comment or question.
Hey, folks, I won't take up too much of y'all's time. Just wanted to let y'all know that your words going across, your words getting out. I've been a rancher most of my life in South Texas, right by the Mexican border. So if someone like me, like Freya I've lost count of the number of things I've learned, from just following. And, you would think, oh, well, rancher, he's going to be the last person who's going to be like, I get it. And I'm not saying it's good on me. It's not. It is zero on me. It's on y'all, that y'all are getting the word out and letting people know about what you're going through. And I know in other terms that it can be tough sometimes because you wonder, am I in an echo chamber? Am I getting my word out? It's making it. And good on all of y'all. And just know that those of us who, don't have the medical conditions or anything else are starting to learn and understand. And so good job on everybody. That was my piece.
Thank you.
I was just going to say quickly, there is a listener here, I don't know if I'll bring it up, but Kev is based, I believe, in Australia. A lovely guy, really nice person all round. When he was in Australia, and I don't know if it's that where Michael is based, there is a lot of ignorance in the medical care over there for both people who do transition and people who have DSDs, to the point where there's quite a few people with DSDs over there who were told, that their conditions were more akin to identity and trans identities than actual medical conditions. In Australia at the moment, there is a lot of issues surrounding that, sadly, and a lot of ignorance and a lot of gender ideology, I would call it, in the political systems, and it is causing absolute devastation over there. In a way, there are people. There is a gentleman who runs pretty much one of the main intersex organisations, Mr. Carpenter. Talk about him. He doesn't even have a DSD condition. I've spoken to other some activists and former activists that I'm still in touch with, DSD activists, and they say that he doesn't have a DSD condition. He has a hormonal issue. I don't know if it's called secondary hypogonadism. So unlike primary hypogonadism, which is quite severe, it's like it's just like a condition basically that happens, but isn't really classed as a DSD. There's no other issue going on, so to speak. And yet he has now rebranded himself. Well, he's branded himself for quite a number of years as a major intersex activist over there, even encouraging people who don't have DSD conditions to self-identify as intersex, which obviously muddies the waters considerably. You get these activists, sadly, right around the world, not just in Australia. It happens in New Zealand. After speaking to Graham, my friend with XXY in New Zealand, who says it's happening over there too, where people are self-identifying as having a DSD or under the identity of intersex, and they are spreading a lot of misinformation about our conditions, all in the name of gender identity ideology. And it's causing a lot of issues. It's spreading harmful misinformation. It's gone really bad. And these people often can't even get medical treatments anymore because they've demedicalized it over there, especially in New Zealand, where they've demedicalized intersex or DSDs. They've totally demedicalized it, so people can no longer really get medical treatments for it because it's more akin to an identity rather than medical conditions, what they are. And it's just like, this is the problem. This is how damaging this can be. This is proof of it. James, who's listening in now, is saying it's started to happen and creep into California. And it's scaring a lot of people with DSD conditions, because it's like, especially in America, and as we've already heard about Alex, who has a very rare XXXY mosaic condition, she had her medical insurance taken away from her because they changed the logistics of the language in the medical and in insurance. So it had to go more akin to intersex identity rather than what she was diagnosed with. And then she lost her insurance over that temporarily. I don't know if she's managed to get it sorted or not yet, but it caused unimaginable trauma and pain for her. And this is the damage this can do. This is the real life damage from real life people who are having to experience this sort of onslaught of misinformation being spread about our conditions. And it's changing the medical language when it shouldn't be, because as I say, they are medical conditions, not identities.
I've called out, by the way, I've called out Morgan Carpenter, who is a big activist from Australia. And I've called him out about treating intersex as an identity, and even their definition of quote unquote intersex, right? Where it's that very vague 1.7 or even 5%, because some orgs are claiming this, that 5% of people are quote unquote intersex. I've called Morgan out on this, and then was met with hostility. Was met with super hostility and swearing, and then I was blocked. And so I'm just like, okay, and again, like, I don't see how these, huge umbrella terms are helpful for us, because, besides perhaps like peer groups where, we might go through like similar like struggles with like body image, or we might go through similar struggles with like infertility, besides having like a peer group like that, but that language should not be in, medical schools or medical language. It should be very condition specific, and the condition, right? And I've mentioned this before, but the condition actually shouldn't be named after the people who discovered it, quote unquote, but it should be named after what it does. So for example, androgen insensitivity syndrome, I like, because it right there in the description of it, what you're talking about, rather than like Turner syndrome, which is named after a doctor, right? So I prefer that language of quote unquote androgen insensitivity syndrome, because it's descriptive, and you can, doctors who have studied this, or, should have an idea, even if they're not completely familiar with what your syndrome, what your condition is and does. It's not helpful. It's in fact the opposite of helpful. It's detrimental, because it causes confusion, where people are naming like 3 to 5 conditions they think are all in one, and it's just it does not impact our day-to-day lives. What impacts our day-to-day lives is, like I said, like the condition-specific language, and yeah. So that yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have Katie speak, and then Swallow the Pill will speak, and then Cynthia will wrap this up.
So EXO, I had a very similar experience with Morgan Carpenter. And all I was trying to say to him was, if you want to be a community, then you need to find a word that is truthful and accurate for all DSDs, and intersex isn't. So if you really were interested in that, you would find a new word that works for everyone, that doesn't mislabel people, but they're not open to it because their brand is intersex. That's what they're selling. And so that's why we never make any progress, and we never will. We will always disagree. And so it's really about asserting facts, which is why my picture says facts. But separate to that, I agree with you. And at least your condition isn't named after 4 doctors. But I will say it's very important to not use names that don't mean anything. Like, for example, one thing I learned recently from another girl with my condition is there are women that have a different condition that looks a lot like mine, and it's called WNT4 deficiency. And it's not a variant of my condition. It's a specific gene that doesn't work that causes similar things, but not the same things, different things. And so there are a few women with my diagnosis who've gone like crazy into intersex activism, and they know that they can't argue it on the basis of, the condition, but they argue it on the basis of it's just language we use because we're different, which is not a good enough reason to call someone intersex. But I often wonder, because WNT4, from what I've heard recently, is a much more, it causes masculinization in a way that MRKH does not. I often wonder if some of those girls, because I hear that sometimes people are misdiagnosed with MRKH when really they have WNT4. I have to wonder sometimes if that's what it is. And because they say they just don't feel, I don't know what it is anymore. I'm just saying there's no preciseness with any of these conditions. And so it's just a free-for-all. But I would prefer if, Müllerian agenesis or Müllerian hypogenesis, which is the actual name of my diagnosis, was separate than WNT4 deficiency, because they're not the same.
Thanks, Katie. Swallow the Pill, you're next.
Hi, I'm sorry if you guys covered this. I was a little bit late. I just have a question, and I feel like I probably know the answer, but I don't want to assume and be wrong. From what I gather and from how it seems, it kind of seems like all of this insanity and force teaming is coming from the gender ideology activists. And I'm wondering if I can't imagine that it would have originated anywhere but there. But again, I don't want to assume and be wrong. Is there any world DSD association that at any point in the past decided, yeah, let's shove ourselves in with, the rest of the alphabet? Or is it more the way that it seems? And do we know is really kind of my question, just how did this insanity get going?
The answer is no, and I'm sorry to come back in again, but I just want to make this very clear. There is no World DSD organization because there is no singular community of 40 different medical conditions. There are 2 things that exist. One is specific organizations related to each condition, and then intersex organizations. Intersex organizations are the ones that they've decided to wholesale steal all DSDs and claim anyone with any reproductive difference whatsoever is intersex, which is a lie, and then go and insert intersex into gender. And then we have these condition-specific organizations, and those organizations are afraid And ultimately, each condition has a few crazies that are like way into intersex activism. They're totally queer, balls to the wall. And if anybody says anything, they're shamed. The organizations are shamed because they get shamed by these very few people who say you're not being inclusive. And then the organizations stand down and don't stand up for facts or for most of the people with the condition. And that's what's happened. And then on top of it, the intersex organizations, and there's an interview with Kimberly Zeiselman from Interact, where she said, I go where the money is. She actually said this, and the money is with gender. So that's what I'm aligning myself with. And she's gone to all these governments, and she's gone to NGOs and hospital systems, and basically shoved their content and propaganda down their throat. And that is why when you Google anything online, that's what you see.
I'd like to just add on to that as well. Katie is exactly right with that. There was a survey done by one of the European Union's in-house organisations where they compiled a list about, so quote unquote, intersex, and how many people had it across the European Union and what people's thoughts were. And when they did the survey, they released the survey to all the LGBTQI organisations out there. Stonewall was one of them, but they didn't release it to any of the condition-specific organisations. So when DSD families and all the condition-specific organisations went to the it's all in Claire's The Invention of Intersex article. I will put it again. We have been circulating it for a while now, but it has all the backup, all the evidence, what's happened. But when the condition-specific organisations and DSD families here in the UK questioned this European Union organisation and said, why haven't we been informed? Why didn't you ask for our opinion or our members' opinion? The people who have these conditions, why haven't you asked them or included them into the survey? And when they asked that, they were categorically called transphobic, even though our conditions have got nothing to do with being transgender. It was complete and utter just nonsense and a total shambles in a way. And it really, and all the data that was released to all these totally just unrelated organizations. And in the actual survey, which is quite funny, a lot of them, a third of the people who were questioned claimed to be intersex, but they didn't have a diagnosis of a DSD condition. So they were self-identifying just for the fun of it, basically. And it just goes to show how dangerous this has become because it's starting to cause issues within the statistics. So those statistics now in the European Union, they're totally voided, in my opinion, because they just don't represent the true reality of people with legitimate DSD conditions. So it just goes to show I'm not somebody who's going against trans people at all. I would never wish to do that, and I wouldn't ever do that to people of gender identity. However, when these organisations are starting to do that now, where they're purposely confusing identity with medical conditions, and then when these condition-specific organisations have, approached them, peacefully, just saying, why hasn't this been done? Just asking a simple question and then being completely trodden on and told that they're transphobic. It's just absolutely mind-bogglingly insane. And if I will put it onto my timeline, but it's fully backed up with evidence. So this article Claire's done, and it's by Case Files. If anyone follows her, she's got complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, and she has documented this. These abuses that have been happening to people with DSD conditions unfortunately, from organisations of LGBTQI. The I being intersex. So they just don't represent us. They do not represent the people with the conditions anymore. It's sad. It really is sad. And it's sad that people are falsely using transphobia, the word transphobia at, people with legitimate concerns. And this is why people get so angry by being falsely called these words, these buzzwords, so to speak, constantly. because, we're allowed to be concerned, when our conditions are being completely mislabeled and, completely trodden on by other people who have no DSD conditions whatsoever.
Well, you know what, Nick,
at
this point, I'm beyond just concerned. We're being abused. Like, plain and simple, we're being abused for profit. And I'm angry about it. And there's a huge lobby that's taking vulnerable people, right? And propaganda and separating people from a very important function of their body and a very important developmental stage of their bodies, right? And purposefully messing with that for profit. So at this point, I'm past concerned. I'm past feigning like kindness. I'm one of the kindest people ever. I literally work with autistic and other special needs kids, in where I don't put myself first ever. I am there like taking care of their needs, and I'm patient and loving, and I can be kind and patient and loving to anybody, but I refuse to be abused. I refuse to be abused on this big a scale for fucking, and pardon my language, money. Because at the end of the day, like, this is what it is about. And Kimberly Zeiselman's words are like right there. So I'm done, and yeah, so that's it.
Okay.
I've just linked the article, by the way, into the space at the top in the nest.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to just send me, Turner, you can send me the PDF if you find it. James can send me the link to the documentary. And that XXY, you can also send me Claire's article, and Zach and I can post everything in a thread, and maybe even ask if Claire would want it reposted on Zach's website, or even put some kind of article together on all of this and all of the craziness going on around the quote-unquote activism that seems like it's more destructive than constructive. Yeah, hopefully help to get the word out. Also, if anybody putting this out there wants to potentially write an article for the Paradox Institute Zach's website and have it published, please let either of us know, and we can talk about it with you and see if it's something that we would want to post or do more content on, potentially a space or a video or anything like that. So please feel free to send submissions to either one of us for that, and we'll help you out. But we are going to have to cut things off because we're super hungry. We haven't had dinner. But thank you again for everybody coming in here and speaking and asking questions and engaging. It was great. Again, all of you are amazing. The fact that you can not just scream all the time about this and be composed and talk about it as eloquently and just calmly as you do is amazing. It really speaks to your characters.
Nick,
You're
if you
great.
do it, I'm gonna no. Nick, don't even think about it. Don't
I'm not
about
going to do it. I'm not going to do it. No, basically, I'll just explain very quickly. Turner once hosted a space, and I had just had a foul exchange with some gender ideologist activists, and I think I roared a bit. If anyone's seen Patsy Stone when she does the scream when Saffron is moving back from the halls of residence in Absolutely Fabulous, I did something like that. It did sound like something from Psycho.
Well, thank you for restraining yourselves here. You're all great. I can understand getting frustrated in that situation. But yeah.
I'll be hosting an after party. Zach, Sin, thank you for hosting. I love you guys. Go eat. Go take care of yourselves. Wishing you guys the best. Thank you, Zach, for all you do at the Paradox Institute. Thank
you.
Getting some information out there. It is, very, very appreciated. Thank you, Cynthia, for being a good friend, for being a host, for being so kind and understanding. Congratulations again, because I'm so, so happy for you. I'll see you at the after party. Bye, guys. Thank you for listening, by the way.
Bye, all. Thank you.
Thank you.